Chloe Harrington set the dessert plate in front of Evelyn with both hands and a smile so clean it could have passed for genuine. Evelyn looked down at the parfait, layered cream, fresh strawberries glistening under the restaurant's warm light, and something moved through her chest that she couldn't name yet. Not suspicion, not fear, just a small, cold wrongness, like a key turning in the wrong lock. I remembered you mentioned parfait was your favorite, Chloe said. Evelyn looked up. Damien was already laughing at something on his phone, glass raised, not watching. The other guests at the anniversary table, his business associates, their manicured wives, were already lifting forks. She was allergic to strawberries, severely. Everyone who worked inside Blackwood Tower knew it. It was in her medical file. It had been on the catering brief for tonight. Chloe had coordinated the entire dinner. Evelyn pushed the plate aside. "I can't eat this." Chloe blinked. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Blackwood. I must have forgotten." She hadn't forgotten. The way her eyes didn't move, steady, patient, already somewhere else in her mind, told Evelyn everything. But Damien was already turning toward the table, and the moment passed the way most things passed in their marriage, with Evelyn swallowing the truth to keep the evening smooth. She reached for her water glass instead. That was her last ordinary moment. 40 minutes later, she was on the floor of the restaurant bathroom, throat closing, hands braced against the cold tile, trying to breathe through something that felt like her own body deciding to quit. Someone had switched dessert plates during the confusion when the lights dimmed for the toast. She'd taken one bite, before she realized. She heard the paramedics before she saw them. She heard Damien's voice in the hallway, calm and steady, telling someone it was probably just stress, that Evelyn had been overreacting to everything lately. She heard Chloe say, softly, "I feel terrible. I had no idea she'd actually eat it." And she heard Damien laugh, a short, quiet sound. The kind of laugh that means, not now, we'll deal with it later. She lay on that tile and understood that later was never coming. If you've ever loved someone so completely that you stopped noticing when they stopped loving you back, drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to know how far this story has traveled. And if this is your first time here, subscribe and stay until the end, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about this woman, and about what a person can survive. This is the story of Evelyn Ashcroft, and it starts the night her husband chose to laugh. She had not always been this careful. There was a version of Evelyn, younger, less watchful, still operating on the assumption that the world meant well, who would have called the strawberry incident an accident, who would have apologized for making a scene, who would have thanked the paramedics, smoothed her dress, and sat back down at that table and smiled for the rest of the night, because that was what Damien needed, and what Damien needed had been, for a very long time, the organizing principle of her entire life. That version was 12 years old. The Evelyn who came back to consciousness in the emergency room, a V in her arm, oxygen monitor clipped to her finger, fluorescent lights buzzing above her like something indifferent, was 39 years old and had not slept well in months, and had spent the last year telling herself that the cold distance she felt in her marriage was something she could fix if she just tried harder, dressed better, asked less, expected less, became smaller and more agreeable and easier to love. She stared at the ceiling and breathed carefully and did the math. She had been in this emergency room for, she checked the clock, 2 hours and 17 minutes. Damien had not come in. Not once. The nurse who admitted her had asked if she wanted them to contact her husband, and Evelyn had said yes, and they had, and he still had not come in. She knew he was in the building. She could hear his voice occasionally through the curtain separating her bay from the hallway, that low, controlled tone he used in professional settings, the one that made people feel both reassured and slightly afraid. He was speaking to someone, probably one of his security detail, possibly his lawyer, though she couldn't imagine what legal question would be more urgent than his wife's airway. She did not cry. She noticed the absence of tears the way you notice a room where furniture used to be. What she felt instead was something quieter and more permanent, clarity. The specific kind that arrives not as a revelation, but as a confirmation of something you already knew and had been refusing to act on. Like finally stepping on a scale after avoiding it for months. The number doesn't surprise you. You just have to stop pretending it doesn't exist. She had married Damien Blackwood when she was 27 years old, at a ceremony in his family's Connecticut estate, surrounded by people she didn't know well, and flowers that cost more than her first apartment. She had been in love with him the way you fall in love with someone who is both brilliant and dangerous, helplessly, with your whole chest, knowing somewhere in the back of your mind that this kind of love asks everything and returns what it wants. He had been extraordinary then. Not kind, exactly. Kindness wasn't his natural mode, but present. Attentive in the way powerful men can be when something has their full attention, which is to say completely, dangerously, like standing in a spotlight that could switch off without warning. She had understood, even then, that she was one of several things competing for his focus. His company, his empire, his family name, his shadow life. The one she had learned about slowly, in pieces, over the first 3 years of their marriage, until she had the complete picture. Damian Blackwood was not just the CEO of Blackwood Capital. I was the head of the Blackwood Syndicate, one of the oldest and most ruthless organized crime operations on the eastern seaboard. He moved money through legitimate investments. He owned politicians and judges the way other men owned suits. He had a code, or what he called a code, and he applied it selectively and never to himself. She had stayed. She knew what that said about her, and she had stayed anyway because she had believed genuinely, not naively, that what they had together was real, even if the world he operated in was not. For 9 years she had been right. He had been faithful. He had been protective. Ferociously so, in the way only a man with genuine power can be. He had built her a design firm from nothing, backed her career publicly, stood beside her at events, and meant it. When rivals had attempted to use her as leverage against him 3 separate times, he had responded with a completeness that she'd found both comforting and slightly horrifying. No one touched her. No one dared. Then Chloe Harrington had arrived 18 months ago with a portfolio of qualifications, a face that stopped a room, and an agenda that Evelyn had been too exhausted and too trusting to identify before it was too late. She lay in the emergency room and thought about the first time she'd noticed it. It hadn't been dramatic. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and she had stopped by Blackwood Tower to drop off papers Damien had left at home, and she had seen Chloe standing in his office doorway. Not inside, just in the doorway, laughing at something he'd said with her whole body, leaning forward slightly, hair falling across one shoulder, the way women laugh when they want you to know they find you extraordinary. Damien had been looking at her, not at his phone, not at the window, at her. Evelyn had watched for 3 seconds, then walked away without leaving the papers. She'd told herself it was nothing, told herself again on the elevator down, told herself a 3rd time in the taxi home, and a 4th time that night, and approximately 400 times over the following 18 months, each time with slightly less conviction. The nurse came in to check her vitals. Her blood pressure was still elevated. Her throat had responded to the epinephrine but remained raw, and every swallow felt like something dragging across gravel. "Is your husband coming in?" the nurse asked. She was young, maybe 25, with the practiced neutral expression of someone who had learned not to react to the things patients' families did or didn't do. "I don't think so," Evelyn said. The nurse wrote something on her chart. Evelyn appreciated that she didn't say anything else. She asked for her phone from the bag they'd set aside with her belongings. The screen was full of notifications. Her assistant, 2 of her project leads, her friend Dana, a work email she hadn't read. Nothing from Damien. One text from an unknown number that turned out to be the catering manager asking if she was all right and expressing what read like genuine terror about liability. She put the phone face down on the bed. Outside the curtain, she heard Damien's voice again, closer now. He was saying something about the resort project in the Maldives. His tone was easy, almost relaxed, the tone of a man who has made peace with the evening's complications and moved on. She had a thought, very calm and very clear. He is not coming in. Not because he was cruel. She wanted to be precise about this, even now, because imprecision had cost her too much already. Damien was not coming in because, somewhere in his internal accounting, the situation had been filed away as managed. Evelyn had received medical attention. The incident was embarrassing, not catastrophic. She would recover, and tomorrow she would come home, and they would discuss it, and he would say something measured and almost but not quite apologetic, and she would accept it because she always had. That was how it had gone, every time, for the past 1.5 years. Small betrayals, cleanly absorbed. Small humiliations, smoothed over. The slow replacement of herself with a quieter, more manageable version that kept the peace and asked for nothing. She was done. The decision arrived not as an explosion, but as a door closing. Quietly. With a finality that she recognized as irreversible the moment she felt it. She called her lawyer at 4:17 in the morning. His name was Robert Kane, and he was one of the few people in New York City who had known her before Damien, who had watched what the marriage had cost her, and who had told her 2 years ago that whenever she was ready, he would be ready. He answered on the second ring, which told her he had never really expected her to wait forever either. "I need to start the divorce proceedings," she said. Silence. Then, "Tonight?" "Tomorrow morning, first thing." "Evelyn." His voice was careful. "Are you somewhere safe?" "I'm in an emergency room." Another silence. Longer. "I'll have the preliminary filings ready by 9. She hung up and lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling. Her throat still ached. Her hands had stopped shaking about an hour ago. Through the thin curtain, she could hear the ordinary sounds of the hospital, carts rolling, someone crying 2 bays over, a monitor beeping in a steady, indifferent rhythm. She thought about the girl she'd been at 27, standing at the top of those Connecticut estate steps, in a dress that had taken 4 months to make, watching Damien walk toward her with that look on his face, the particular look of a man who has just realized he wants something and intends to have it. She had felt, in that moment, completely chosen. She understood now that being chosen by someone like Damien Blackwood was not the same as being safe. The night nurse brought her a cup of water and a blanket without being asked. Evelyn thanked her. The nurse squeezed her hand once, brief, practical, the touch of someone who had seen enough to know when words were the wrong tool, and left. Evelyn drank the water. She thought about Chloe's face when she'd set down that parfait. The steadiness in her eyes, the smile that didn't reach far enough. She thought about how long that kind of planning takes. The casual mention of parfait, the coordination with catering, the plate switch in the dimmed light, and felt the cold understanding settle through her like water finding its level. This had not been carelessness. This had been a message. And Damien had laughed. She was discharged at 6:45 in the morning. She took a taxi home. She walked through the penthouse they shared. All clean lines and expensive silence, the home she had designed herself because it was the only way she could make it feel like hers. And she went into the primary bedroom and she looked at it for a long moment. The perfectly made bed that only one person had slept in for the last several months. And she went to the closet and began pulling out the things that were irreplaceable. Not jewelry, not the designer clothes, not anything he had given her. She took the photographs of her parents, the sketchbooks from design school, a ring that had belonged to her grandmother, the external hard drive she kept her client files on, the small folder of documents, financial records, personal correspondence, the business valuation she'd quietly commissioned 6 months ago when some part of her had already begun to prepare for this. She was packed in 40 minutes. She called her assistant, left a message. Then she called Dana, who answered on the first ring and asked no questions and said she had a spare room and would be home by 8. Evelyn took one last look at the penthouse. The light was coming up over the city, gray and early and indifferent, the way New York light is in October when the summer warmth has finally given up pretending. She walked out the door. She did not look back. Not because she was strong, she was not feeling particularly strong right then. She was feeling scraped clean and slightly unreal, the way you feel after a fever breaks. But because she understood that looking back was a habit she could no longer afford. Downstairs, the doorman held the door for her without comment. The street was almost empty. A cab appeared almost immediately, the way cabs do in the city sometimes, as if they know. She climbed in, gave Dana's address, and sat back in the seat. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. Damien. A text, finally, at 6:59 in the morning. Heard you were discharged. I'll be home by noon. We should talk. She turned the phone face down on the seat beside her and looked out the window at the city moving past, gray and early and completely indifferent to what she was leaving behind. She did not reply. Dana Kowalski lived in a brownstone in Brooklyn that smelled like coffee and old wood, and the particular accumulated warmth of a woman who had lived alone long enough to make a place entirely her own. She opened the door before Evelyn could knock, took one look at her, and stepped aside without a word. Evelyn walked in and sat down on the couch and didn't move for a long time. Dana brought coffee. set it on the table, sat across from her in the armchair she'd had since graduate school, the one with the worn armrest that she'd never gotten around to replacing, and waited. That was Dana's particular skill, the ability to be present without demanding anything from it. Evelyn had known her for 16 years, since the two of them had shared a studio apartment in the East Village that was so small you had to choose between the refrigerator door and the bathroom door being open at the same time. Dana knew when to talk and when to simply exist in the same room, and right now she existed quietly, drinking her coffee, letting Evelyn find her own way back to language. "I called Robert last night," Evelyn said finally. Dana nodded. She'd met Robert Kane at a dinner 4 years ago and had liked him immediately. "From the emergency room." Dana set her mug down. "Tell me," Evelyn told her. Not everything, not with the kind of chronological precision she'd use in a deposition, because she wasn't ready for that yet. But enough. The parfait. The dimmed lights. Waking up on the tile. Damien's voice in the hallway, calm and unbothered, talking about the Maldives resort while his wife's throat was swelling shut 40 feet away. The text at 6:59 in the morning that said we should talk, as if the appropriate response to almost killing your wife was a conversation scheduled for a convenient hour. When she finished, Dana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long has Chloe been in the picture?" 18 months. "And how long have you known it was more than professional?" Evelyn looked at the coffee she still hadn't touched. "About 14 months. Dana didn't say, "Why didn't you leave then?" because Dana understood the mathematics of long marriages and the particular paralysis of loving someone who is also the entire architecture of your daily life. She just nodded and said, "What do you need from me right now?" "A room, a few days, time to think." "You have the room for as long as you need it." Dana picked her mug back up. "And Evelyn, don't go back to that penthouse alone." "I know. I mean it. That woman put strawberries in front of you knowing what they would do." "I know," Evelyn said again. She drank the coffee. It was too strong, the way Dana always made it, and the bitterness helped. She slept for 3 hours on Dana's spare bed, which had a mattress that was too soft and pillows that smelled like cedar, and she woke up to her phone ringing with a number she didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail. Then she called Robert. He was already at his desk. She could hear the particular silence of an early morning law office, the kind of quiet that accumulates when everyone in the building is moving carefully. "I need to understand the exposure," she said, without preamble. "Yours or his?" "Both. Start with the financials." Robert walked her through it. The prenuptial agreement they'd signed 12 years ago, one Damien's lawyers had drafted, and that she'd been too young and too in love to read with the skepticism it deserved, protected the majority of his premarital assets. But 12 years of marriage meant 12 years of commingled finances, shared acquisitions, and property that fell outside the prenuptial framework. Her design firm, which he had seed-funded but which she had built from 4 clients and 1 assistant into a 40-person operation with a national client list, was a legitimate question. "He'll go for the firm," she said. "His lawyers will try. We have a strong argument for your sweat equity. 12 years of documented work. Client relationships that are yours, not his. A judge would see that." "His judges," she said. Silence. Robert knew what she meant. "We'll work around it," he said carefully. "We have options." She spent the rest of that day and the next 2 days doing what she did when her mind needed somewhere to go. She worked. She opened her laptop on Dana's kitchen table and began pulling together every financial document she had personal access to. Bank statements, tax filings, property deeds, records of transfers she had noticed over the past year and quietly copied without fully understanding why. Her instinct had been right. The instinct had always been right. She had just been too committed to hope to follow it. On the 3rd day, Damien called. She let it ring 4 times, then answered, because Robert had told her to document everything and a conversation was documentation. "Where are you?" His voice was measured, not warm, not cold, controlled, the way it always was when he was trying to determine the shape of a problem before committing to a response. "Somewhere safe," she said. A pause. "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It's not." She heard him exhale. It was the particular exhale of a man who was not accustomed to incomplete information. "Evelyn, What happened at the restaurant was, don't. I was going to say it was, I said don't. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Whatever you're about to call it, an accident, an overreaction, a misunderstanding, don't. I was on the floor of a bathroom with my throat closing while you discussed real estate 40 feet away. I don't need your framing of that. The silence that followed was different from his usual silences. This one had texture. I didn't know how serious it was, he said finally. You knew I was in the emergency room. I thought, Damien. She stopped him. I filed for divorce. You'll receive the papers today or tomorrow. I'd like to keep this civil for both our sakes, but that decision is not negotiable. Another silence. Longer. She could feel him recalibrating, the way he did when a situation moved outside the parameters he'd planned for. He had not planned for this. She understood that. He had expected her to come home, to be difficult for a few days, to eventually be managed back into their ordinary life. He had not planned for the version of her sitting in a Brooklyn kitchen at 8 in the morning, having already called a lawyer from the emergency room floor. Evelyn, his voice shifted slightly. Lower. The voice he used when he wanted her to understand something was serious. You need to think carefully about what you're doing. I have been, she said. For about a year. She hung up. Her hands were not shaking. She noted this with something close to surprise. The divorce papers reached Blackwood Tower at 2:17 that afternoon, according to Robert's confirmation. By 3, Evelyn's access to the shared financial accounts had been frozen. She had expected this, had moved her personal funds into a separate account 3 days before, quietly, in the amounts that wouldn't trigger automatic alerts. The freeze was Damien's first move. Not a negotiation, not a conversation, but a demonstration of control. A reminder of the infrastructure she depended on. What he didn't know was that she had spent 3 days identifying exactly which parts of that infrastructure she actually needed and which parts she could walk away from. The answer had surprised her, in a way that felt like grief and relief at the same time. She needed less than she'd thought. She had been living inside his world so long she had confused its size for necessity. She called her assistant Marcus and told him she was taking a brief leave. She did not explain. Marcus was 26 years old and extremely competent and had the professional instinct not to ask questions that weren't his to ask. He told her the Whitmore project had hit a delay with the permit office and asked how she wanted to handle it. They spent 20 minutes discussing the Whitmore project, and when she hung up, she felt, for the first time in days, like a specific person with a specific set of skills rather than a woman in the process of dismantling her own life. It was Damien's next move that she hadn't prepared for. He called Dana. Dana relayed the conversation word for word the way she always did, without editorializing. He had been polite, concerned. He had said that Evelyn was going through something difficult and that he was worried about her mental state. He had asked Dana to encourage her to come home and talk before doing anything she couldn't undo. He used the phrase mental state, Evelyn said. Twice, Dana confirmed. Evelyn set down the spatula she'd been using to make eggs. It was Dana's turn to be away from home, so Evelyn had taken over the kitchen and stood very still for a moment. He's setting up the narrative, she said. That's what I thought. The narrative was not difficult to construct from Damien's position. A wife who had become increasingly unstable, who had overreacted to what was clearly an innocent mistake at a dinner party, who had fled the family home in the early hours of the morning and was now in an unknown location making impulsive legal decisions. The story would spread through the specific social ecosystem they'd both inhabited, the charity galas, the business dinners, the overlapping circles of wealth and influence where reputation was both currency and weapon. And in that story, Evelyn would be fragile, erratic, a woman who needed help, not a woman who had evidence. She needed to move faster. She called Robert again. How quickly can we get the civil filing for the restaurant incident? We're already building it. The hospital records are clean. They document the anaphylactic reaction, the timing, everything. We need one more thing, the catering brief. I have it, Evelyn said. She had taken a photograph of her copy 3 months ago when she'd first begun to notice discrepancies in how Chloe managed events, the way certain details about Evelyn's dietary restrictions somehow got smoothed over, the way seating arrangements consistently placed Evelyn in peripheral positions. She had taken the photograph without knowing exactly why. I can send it in the next 10 minutes. Do it, Robert said. She sent it. Then she did something she had been turning over for 2 days. She called Marcus and asked him to pull the security footage request from an event 3 weeks prior, a company dinner at which Evelyn had been jostled on a staircase and fallen badly enough to bruise 3 ribs. At the time, it had seemed like an accident. The staircase had been crowded. Her heel had caught the edge of a step. These things happen. She had not seen Chloe's face in the moment before she fell. Marcus came back in 40 minutes. The security company required a formal request, he said, which he could process through the firm's account since they'd used the same venue for a client event, but it would take 3 to 4 business days. Process it, she said. And Marcus, don't tell anyone you're doing it. Understood, he said, in the tone of someone who understood more than was being said. 12 days after the divorce papers were delivered, Evelyn received a phone call from Sandra Blackwood. Damien's mother was 71 years old and had been described by 3 different New York Magazine profiles as formidable, which was the word that people who were afraid of her used in print. Sandra had not been warm to Evelyn during the marriage. Not cruel, exactly, but cool in the particular way of women who have decided their son is beyond ordinary criticism and view his wife accordingly, as a secondary and possibly temporary arrangement. She had been present at the wedding and present at major holidays and consistently absent from the spaces where Evelyn might have needed her. She was calling now. I want you to reconsider, Sandra said. No greeting, no preamble. Whatever Damien has done, divorce is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Evelyn sat down. She was in Robert's conference room where she'd been for most of the morning going over financial disclosures, and the room was very quiet and very beige. Sandra, she said carefully, your son stood in a hospital hallway discussing real estate while I was treated for anaphylactic shock. He told me you've been under a great deal of stress. There it was again, stress. I'm sure he did. Evelyn, you have built a life with this family, a good life. Whatever issues you two are having, Chloe Harrington poisoned me. She said it plainly, without drama, because plain was the only register she had left for this particular truth. She knew about my allergy. She coordinated the dinner. She switched the plate. And your son laughed. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then, that's a very serious accusation. I have the catering brief. I have the hospital records. I have security footage from 3 other incidents. She didn't have the footage yet, technically, but she was going to, and she was tired of speaking in the cautious conditional. This is not stress, Sandra. This is evidence. Another silence. When Sandra spoke again, her voice was different. Not softer exactly, but less certain. Damien is not aware of what Chloe may have done independently. Maybe not, Evelyn said, but he chose her over me every single time she did it. That's the part I can't forgive. Sandra did not call again. What happened next was less a confrontation than an escalation that nobody could stop once it started. Damien's lawyers filed a counter-motion challenging the jurisdiction of the civil suit and questioning the chain of custody on the catering documents. Chloe retained her own attorney, a move that surprised Evelyn less than it seemed to surprise Damien, according to what Robert was hearing through channels. The security footage from the staircase incident came back, and Marcus sent it without comment, and Evelyn watched it 3 times, very carefully, on a laptop in Dana's kitchen. Chloe had been 2 steps above her. Evelyn could see the moment, 3 seconds, a shift of weight, a hand that moved and then didn't. And it was not conclusive. It was the kind of thing a defense attorney would call ambiguous. But ambiguous was not the same as innocent, and Evelyn's ribs had healed, and she knew what she'd felt in the half-second before she fell, which was a pressure at her shoulder that had no explanation if you believed it was an accident. She sent the footage to Robert. He called her within the hour. This changes things, he said. I know. The civil case just became something else. I know that too. What she hadn't anticipated, what nobody had anticipated, was Chloe's response to the footage's existence becoming known. Information travels in that world through invisible channels, and Chloe was not without her own resources, and within 48 hours of Evelyn sending the footage to Robert, something happened that closed every remaining door between the life she had been living and the one she was building. She had gone back to the penthouse. Not to stay. She was not going back to stay. She had made that decision definitively. But because there were documents in the home office, specific financial records she hadn't been able to copy remotely, that Robert needed before the next filing deadline. She had timed it for a Tuesday afternoon when she knew Damien had a board meeting that ran until 6. She had her own key. She had every legal right to be there. She had told no one she was going. The penthouse was not empty. Chloe was there. She was standing in the living room when Evelyn walked in, not doing anything, not pretending to do anything, just standing in the middle of the room that Evelyn had spent 6 months designing in a way that made it absolutely clear she had not arrived by accident. She was wearing a silk blouse the color of the curtains Evelyn had chosen. She had a glass of wine in one hand. Around her neck was the anniversary necklace, the one Damien had given Evelyn 2 years ago, white gold and pave diamonds, which had been in the jewelry box in the primary bedroom the last time Evelyn had seen it. They looked at each other. Evelyn's first instinct was purely physical. Her body registered threat the way bodies do, with a narrowing of focus and a very specific kind of stillness. She did not say anything. She did not move. She stood in the doorway of her own home, still legally hers for whatever that was worth, and looked at Chloe Harrington standing in the middle of it wearing her necklace and felt, beneath the cold rage, something she recognized as useful, absolute certainty. "You should have just left," Chloe said. Her voice was easy, almost friendly, in the way that certain kinds of hostility adopt friendliness as a disguise. "You would have saved yourself all of this." Evelyn walked past her, directly to the home office, unlocked the file cabinet with the keys she'd kept on her person for exactly this reason, and began pulling the documents she needed. "He's not coming back to you," Chloe continued from the doorway of the office. "You understand that, right? What you had, whatever you think it was, that's been over for a long time." Evelyn did not look up. She sorted through the files with hands that were steady and a mind that was very, very focused. "I'm going to be Mrs. Blackwood," Chloe said. And there was something in her voice that Evelyn finally heard clearly. Not quite confidence, but something adjacent to it. Something that had the shape of confidence, but the texture of compulsion. Of someone who had committed so fully to a plan that they'd forgotten to consider what came after. Evelyn found the last document she needed. She put everything in her bag. She straightened up and looked at Chloe for a long moment, the way you look at something you want to remember accurately. "You put strawberries in front of me," she said. "You switched the plate. You pushed me on a staircase." She paused. "You did all of that, and Damien still doesn't know, does he? You didn't tell him, because if he knew exactly what you'd done, even he would—" "He knows enough," Chloe cut in. "He knows what you've told him," Evelyn said. "There's a difference." She walked out of the office and through the living room and out the front door. In the elevator going down, she took out her phone and called Robert. "She was in the penthouse," she said, "wearing the anniversary necklace. I have the building's lobby security timestamp for my entry and exit. I need you to note it." "Noted," Robert said. "Are you all right?" "Yes." She thought about it. "She said she's going to be Mrs. Blackwood." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Evelyn, I need you to listen to me carefully. Whatever evidence you have, the footage, the catering brief, the hospital records, the financial documents, I need copies of all of it in a location that neither Damien nor anyone connected to the Blackwood organization can access." "I've already done that," she said. "Good." He paused. "Because I got a call this afternoon from a contact at the DA's office. Someone, I don't know who, and I'm working on finding out, has filed a report claiming that you have been misappropriating funds from the Blackwood household accounts. The filing came in this morning." The elevator reached the lobby. Evelyn walked out into the afternoon light, into the ordinary noise of the city, and stood on the sidewalk and breathed. "That's Chloe," she said. Not a question. "Almost certainly. Damien's lawyers wouldn't move that fast without his direct authorization, and my read on him right now is that he's still hoping to pull you back to the table. This is something else. This is someone trying to criminalize the divorce before you can complete it." The traffic moved past her, a cab horn. Someone's music from an open window above. The city doing what it always did, indifferent and continuous. "What do I do?" she asked. "Come to my office," Robert said. "Now, bring everything." She flagged a cab, sat in the back seat and watched the city move past and felt the exact dimensions of what she was inside of. Not just a divorce, not just a civil case, but something that had teeth and intention and a person behind it who had decided that Evelyn Ashcroft could not be allowed to walk away cleanly. She was not going to be allowed to walk away cleanly, but she was going to walk away. The cab stopped at a red light. Through the window, she watched a woman about her age cross the street pushing a stroller with one hand and holding a coffee cup with the other, talking on the phone, completely absorbed in her own ordinary morning. Evelyn watched her until the light changed. Then she looked forward and thought about San Francisco, which she had never particularly thought about before, but which a colleague had mentioned last year as a place where a serious designer could build a serious practice from scratch, given the right introduction. She had filed the information away the way she filed away most things that seemed useful but not immediately necessary. It was immediately necessary now. She pulled out her phone and, while the cab moved uptown through the specific chaos of a Tuesday afternoon in Manhattan, she typed a name into her contacts and looked at it for a moment. Alexander Sterling, a client she had worked with briefly 3 years ago on a commercial project in Chicago. A man who had been straightforward to work with, who had paid on time and asked good questions and sent a handwritten note afterward, which nobody did anymore. Who had mentioned at the project's end that he was expanding his investment portfolio into sustainable real estate on the West Coast, and that he'd be glad to connect her with the right people if she ever considered branching out. She opened her email and began to type. It was not a plan yet. It was the beginning of the shape of a plan, the way the first line on a blueprint is not a building, but is the thing that makes the building possible. She was good at beginnings. She was good at seeing what a space could become before it became it. That was, in the end, what she was going to have to do with the rest of her life. Look at it as it was, not as it had been, and figure out what it could become. The cab pulled up in front of Robert's building. She paid, got out, walked through the glass doors. She did not look back at the street. Robert Kane's office occupied the 14th floor of a building on Lexington Avenue that had the particular quality of old money made respectable. Dark wood, thick carpet, windows that filtered the city light into something almost dignified. Evelyn had been in this office a dozen times over the years, mostly for routine matters, twice for things that had kept her awake afterward. She knew the smell of it, the sound of the ventilation system, the way the afternoon light moved across the conference table between 3 and 5 o'clock. She had never come here feeling like the walls were moving. Robert was already standing when she walked in. His assistant had taken her coat without being asked, which told her he had prepared his staff for the kind of meeting where small courtesies matter because everything else is about to become very large. "Sit down," Robert said. Not unkindly. The way a doctor says it before delivering something that requires you to already be seated. She sat. She put her bag on the table between them. She had brought everything. The physical copies of the documents from the penthouse, the hard drive, the folder of photographs she'd taken over the past several months of various financial records and communications she hadn't been able to explain at the time. Robert sat across from her and folded his hands and looked at her with the expression of a man who has been practicing law for 31 years and has learned that the most important thing he can offer a client in the first 10 seconds of bad news is the appearance of steadiness. "The misappropriation claim," she said. "Tell me all of it." He told her. Someone, and he had now confirmed through his contact at the DA's office, that the filing had come through a third-party attorney with no visible connection to either Damien or Chloe, had submitted documentation alleging that Evelyn Ashcroft Blackwood had, over a period of 14 months, transferred funds from shared household and business accounts into personal accounts without Damien's knowledge or consent. The amounts cited were specific. The account numbers were accurate. The transaction dates were accurate. "Those were legitimate transfers," Evelyn said. "I moved money into my personal account. Money I earned. My design firm invoices go through a shared business account, and I know," Robert said. "I know that. The legal argument is straightforward. The problem is the framing." He opened a folder. "The documentation submitted does not include the invoices. It does not include the business context. It presents the transfers in isolation, which makes them look like something they're not. Who provided the documentation?" "That's the part I've been working on since this afternoon." He paused. He had the look of someone who has found a thing they didn't want to find. The filing was submitted by an attorney named Gerald Marsh. Marsh represents, among other clients, a financial services company called Alderton Group. Alderton Group has a venture partnership with Chloe, Evelyn said. Robert blinked. Her family. Her father, specifically. Marcus Harrington. He's a mid-level finance executive who has been connected to Alderton for about 4 years. He slid a paper across the table. Chloe Harrington is not what she presented herself as when she applied to work at Blackwood Capital. Evelyn looked at the paper. It took her a moment to understand what she was reading, and then it took her another moment to accept what she understood, because the two processes, comprehension and acceptance, had always moved at different speeds for her, and right now the gap between them felt very wide. Chloe had applied for the executive assistant position with a resume that listed a previous role at a private equity firm, a master's degree from Columbia, and references from two senior executives at separate financial institutions. All of it had been verified by Blackwood Capital's HR department before the hire. The Columbia degree was real. The private equity role was real. The references were real. What was not in the resume, and what a standard background check would not have surfaced, was that Marcus Harrington had been in a business dispute with Damian Blackwood's syndicate operations 9 years earlier, a dispute that had resulted in the Harrington family losing a significant contract and a substantial sum of money through what Marcus Harrington had reportedly told associates was deliberate manipulation by the Blackwood organization. There was nothing in the public record. There was nothing that would have triggered a flag. But Robert's contact had access to certain investigative databases that operated in the space between public record and privileged information. And what they showed was a family that had spent 9 years building towards something. "She didn't come for Damien," Evelyn said. Her own voice sounded far away to her. "She came for the organization." "That's my reading," Robert said. "And you?" "I was in the way." She sat back in her chair. The afternoon light was moving across the conference table exactly the way she remembered, slow and indifferent. "Or I was the mechanism. If Damien can be destabilized from within, his marriage destroyed, his judgment compromised, the woman who actually understood his operations removed from his inner circle, then the organization is vulnerable," Robert said. "And whoever Harrington's father is working with, because there's money here that doesn't trace back to him alone, has a window." The room was very quiet. Through the window, 14 floors down, the city moved the way it always moved, continuous and unaware. "Damien doesn't know," she said. "Almost certainly not. He thinks she's in love with him. He thinks," Robert said carefully, "what she has spent 18 months engineering him to think." Evelyn pressed her fingers flat against the surface of the conference table. She could feel the grain of the wood through her fingertips. She focused on that, the specific physical texture of it, because her mind was moving very fast and in several directions simultaneously, and she needed something fixed. She had spent the last 2 weeks building a case against Chloe Harrington for what had been done to her. She had evidence of the allergy incident, the staircase, the financial filing. She had positioned herself as the injured party in a civil action. She had been precise and careful and had moved within the structures available to her, the legal ones, the documented ones, because those were the structures she'd trusted. What she had not planned for was the possibility that Chloe's operation was not simply the act of a woman trying to steal another woman's husband, that it was something with a longer history and a deeper infrastructure and a target that was not Evelyn at all. Evelyn was simply the obstacle that needed to be removed, which meant the civil case, the divorce, the careful documentation, all of it was real and all of it was necessary, but none of it was going to be sufficient. Because the person she was up against was not operating on the scale of a personal grievance. She was operating on the scale of a war. "I need to tell Damien," Evelyn said. Robert looked at her for a long moment. "You're in the middle of divorcing him." "I know. His lawyers will argue that anything you tell him is strategic, that you're manufacturing a threat to reposition yourself as an ally." "I know that too." She thought about it. About Damien in the hospital hallway, discussing the Maldives. About 12 years of a marriage that had been, for most of its length, genuinely real. About the particular stupidity of a brilliant man who had been too proud to consider that someone might be smarter than him in the specific direction that mattered. "He's in danger, real danger. Whatever I think of him right now, whatever he's done, he doesn't see it coming." "If you tell him," Robert said slowly, "it will complicate everything. He may use it to delay the divorce proceedings. His lawyers, I know what his lawyers will do." She picked up her phone, put it down again, picked it up. "Can you document this conversation? The fact that I came to you with this information, that I'm disclosing it voluntarily before any contact with him? I can have my assistant draft a memo right now." "Do it." She stood up, walked to the window and looked out at the city. "And get me a number for someone in his organization. Not his personal line, someone who can put what I'm about to say in front of him in a way that he'll actually hear. She knew who. She had known for 12 years, and had always kept the knowledge in a compartment she'd hoped never to open. His name was Vincent Marr, and he was Damien's oldest friend and his most trusted lieutenant, and he was the only person in the Blackwood Syndicate who had ever looked at Evelyn as something other than an accessory to his boss. She called Vincent from Robert's conference room, with Robert's assistant sitting in the corner taking notes. He answered on the third ring. Mrs. Blackwood. His voice was cautious. He would have heard about the divorce. In that world, there were no secrets that held for more than a week. I need you to listen to me, she said. And I need you to understand that I am not calling you as his wife. I'm calling you because someone has been running an operation against the organization from inside it, and it has been going on for 18 months, and Damien does not know. Silence. The particular quality of it told her she had his full attention. Tell me, Vincent said. She told him. She gave him what she had. The Harrington family connection, the Alderton group, the filing through Gerald Marsh. She did not give him everything, because she was not foolish, and she needed to retain her own leverage, but she gave him enough. She gave him the shape of it, the timeline, the specific mechanisms by which Chloe had worked to isolate Damien from the people who might have identified what was happening. Vincent was quiet for a long time after she finished. She could hear him breathing. She could hear, distantly, what sounded like traffic. When did you find this? He said finally. Today. Robert Kane found the Alderton connection this afternoon. And you called me. I called you. Another silence. Why? She thought about the honest answer, which was complicated, and chose the precise one instead. Because if something happens to Damien before I finish divorcing him, it becomes my problem in ways I don't want it to become my problem. And because he doesn't deserve to be killed by someone who spent 18 months pretending to love him. She paused. Even if he deserves other things. Vincent made a sound that might have been a short, reluctant acknowledgement of something. I'll take care of it, he said. Don't tell him I called. Mrs. Blackwood, I mean it, Vincent. Don't tell him. I need him to hear it from you as intelligence you developed independently. If he thinks I'm involved, he'll spend 3 days convinced you're manipulating him, Vincent said. Yes, I understand. A pause. Are you safe? The question caught her off guard. She stood at the window of Robert's office and looked at the city and considered it. I think so, she said. For now. Chloe Harrington is not just personally motivated, Vincent said. If what you're telling me is accurate, there are people behind her with resources. Watch yourself. He hung up. She stood at the window for another minute. Robert's assistant was still in the corner, pen to paper, face carefully neutral. Robert himself had stepped out to take another call. The room was very quiet. She thought about the word safe. She thought about what it had meant for the past 12 years, to be the wife of the man who ran the Blackwood Syndicate. The particular kind of safety that came from being inside a very powerful structure. How it could feel for a long time, indistinguishable from genuine security, until the structure itself became the source of the threat. She gathered her things. She was not going back to Dana's apartment that night. Dana had a life, and Evelyn had been in her spare room for 11 days and had reached the limit of what she was willing to borrow from someone else's ordinary existence. She had money, not the amount she'd had access to before the account freeze, but enough. The amount she'd moved into her personal account in the careful increments that hadn't triggered alerts. She checked into a hotel on Park Avenue South under her professional name, Evelyn Ashcroft, which she had maintained separately from Blackwood on all her business registration documents since the firm's founding. The room was clean and anonymous and had a window that looked out over a portion of the city that was neither the neighborhood she'd lived in with Damien nor the neighborhood she'd grown up in before him. It was just New York, generic and continuous. She ordered room service and ate half of it and opened her laptop. She had an email from Alexander Sterling. He had responded to her message from the cab. She had half forgotten sending it in the chaos of the afternoon, with a directness that she found, under the circumstances, almost comfortingly straightforward. He had said that he remembered the Chicago project clearly, that she had done exceptional work, that he would be glad to discuss opportunities in San Francisco if she was genuinely considering expanding westward, and that he had a project in early development that might benefit from exactly her kind of thinking. He had included his assistant's number and said to call any time this week. She read it twice. Then she opened a new document and began writing a description of the San Francisco project from memory, which was not yet a plan and not yet a proposal, but was the act of writing down possibilities, which was the first step toward making them real. She worked until past midnight, and then closed the laptop and lay on the hotel bed in the dark, and did not sleep for a long time. 3 days later, the ground shifted. She was in Robert's office again. They had established a rhythm, morning calls and afternoon meetings, the architecture of a legal strategy that was slowly becoming something she trusted. When his phone rang and he answered it and listened for approximately 40 seconds, and then looked at her with the expression she had come to identify as the one preceding bad news. "That was my contact at the DA's office," he said, when he'd hung up. "The misappropriation claim has been escalated. Someone above the original filing attorney's level has taken an interest." "Who?" "A senior prosecutor named Ellison. He's ambitious. He's been looking for something connected to the Blackwood organization for 2 years. And someone has apparently suggested to him that this case is a door." Evelyn felt it before she understood it. The specific dropping sensation of a floor giving way. "They're using me," she said. "The Harrington operation. They filed the misappropriation claim not to convict me. They filed it to attract prosecutorial attention, to create a case that Ellison would pick up because it looks like it leads to Damien. And now you're in the middle of it," Robert said, "because your name is on the filing, because you're the one who moved the money, because you're the visible one," she said. "Chloe is invisible. She's an employee, an assistant. She has no financial relationship with the Blackwood accounts. But I do. I did. For 12 years. She pressed her hands flat on the table again, the same gesture she'd made 3 days ago, looking for something solid. "They built the trap out of my own marriage." Robert leaned forward. "Evelyn, I need you to understand that this is still manageable. We have the invoices. We have the business documentation. The legal case against you is weak on its merits." "But the investigation isn't about the merits," she said. "An investigation itself is the damage. If Ellison opens a formal inquiry, it becomes public. My firm's clients—" She stopped. Thought about the Whitmore project, about the 3 new client relationships Marcus had been nurturing for the past quarter, about what it meant for a design firm built entirely on the professional reputation of its founder to have that founder's name attached to a financial fraud inquiry connected to a known criminal organization. "I'll lose the firm." "Not necessarily." "Robert," she looked at him directly, "you know better than that. In this industry, reputation is the product. Even an investigation, even a closed one, even one that clears me completely. It plants a seed. Clients don't stay to find out how the story ends. They leave before the second act." He didn't argue with her. He knew she was right. She stood up and walked to the window, and the city was there the way it always was, and she looked at it and felt something that she recognized as the specific cold of a person who has just understood the true dimensions of a space they're trapped in. She had been meticulous. She had moved carefully and documented everything and built her case with the precision of someone who had spent 12 years watching a man navigate very complicated situations. She had done everything right. And it had not mattered, because the person working against her had been inside the structure longer, had planned further ahead, and had used Evelyn's own legitimate actions. The account transfers, the business records, the financial relationship with Damien, as the raw material for a trap. "I need to talk to Damien directly," she said. Robert stood up. "Evelyn, not as his wife, not in the context of the divorce." She turned from the window. "I need to sit in a room with him and tell him exactly what is happening, and I need him to understand it, and I need him to deal with it in the way that he deals with things. Because the legal system is not going to be fast enough, and it is not going to be direct enough, and there are people behind Chloe Harrington who have resources and a 9-year head start, and the only person on earth with both the intelligence and the means to cut through it in the time available is a man I am currently divorcing." Robert looked at her for a long moment. "If you meet with him without legal counsel present, then bring yourself. Come with me. Sit in the room." She picked up her bag. "Set it up. Tell Vincent Marr. Use whatever channel you need to use. I need the meeting within 48 hours." The meeting happened in 36. It was in a room she'd never been in before. A private dining room in a building in Midtown that she suspected was connected to the Blackwood organization in a way that would not be traceable from the outside. neutral territory, or what passed for it. Damien was already there when she arrived. He was sitting at the far end of a long table with a glass of water in front of him, and the particular stillness of a man who has been informed of something that has required him to revise his understanding of a significant period of his life. He looked at her when she came in. She had thought, in the cab over, about what she expected to see on his face. Anger, perhaps, or the cold executive mask he used in high-stakes situations. What she saw instead was something that her professional instinct for reading rooms identified, before her personal feelings could interfere, as grief. Not for her. Or not only. For what he'd been made to believe. For the architecture of the past 18 months, which was now disassembling itself in front of him in real time. She sat down across from him. Robert sat beside her. Vincent Marr was at the table's end, not participating, just present, the way Vincent always was, functional and watchful. "She played you," Evelyn said. No preamble. There wasn't any point. Damien looked at her. His jaw was tight. His hands were flat on the table. "Vincent showed me the Alderton connection this morning." "Then you know." "I know what's documented." His voice was careful. "I need to know what else you have." She slid the folder across the table. He opened it without looking away from her first. A small, involuntary moment of something she recognized as his needing to assess her before the documents, which told her that the information had destabilized him more than he was showing. He read. She watched him read. She watched the exact moment he reached the section about the staircase incident, because his jaw did something, a small, brief tightening, that she had seen before, in 12 years of marriage, and that meant he was processing something that had physical implications he hadn't yet let himself feel. "She pushed you," he said. "Not a question. The footage is not conclusive, but yes." He turned another page, kept reading. When he reached the end, he closed the folder and set it flat on the table and looked at his hands for a moment. "The restaurant," he said. "Yes." She knew. "She coordinated the entire dinner, Damien. She wrote the catering brief. My allergy was on it." He was quiet for so long that Robert shifted in his seat beside her. Vincent did not move. The ventilation system in the room made a low, continuous sound. "I laughed," Damien said. "Yes. I was in the hallway and I laughed and you were—" He stopped, started again. "I didn't know how serious it was." "I know you didn't." She said it because it was true and because she needed to be precise, even now, especially now. But you also didn't come in." He had nothing to say to that. There was nothing to say to it. It was the one fact in the entire situation that had no explanation that changed it. "The prosecutor," she said, redirecting them both. "Ellison. He's going to open a formal inquiry if the Harrington operation has the access I think it does to move things at that level. The misappropriation claim is the hook they use to get his attention. My name is on it, which means the inquiry potentially centers on me, which makes the divorce more complicated, which delays it, which keeps you inside the organization's financial structure," Damien said. He understood it immediately, the way he always understood structures, while they pull it apart from inside. "Yes." He leaned back in his chair. He was quiet for another moment, and she could see him doing what he did. The things she had always found both extraordinary and frightening about him, the way he could assess a situation's full architecture in the time it took most people to identify its surface features. "I can deal with Ellison," he said. "I know you can." She kept her voice even. "I'm not asking you to do it for my benefit. I'm asking you to understand what's happening to you." "I understand what's happening." He looked at her. "What do you want from me?" "I want the divorce to proceed without interference. Whatever you do about Chloe, whatever you do about the Harrington operation, that is separate. That is yours. I want out cleanly, and I want the misappropriation claim gone, and I want my firm protected." He held her gaze for a moment that was longer than comfortable. She did not look away. She was not capable of looking away from him in confrontational situations. It was a reflex that had served her well and occasionally made her reckless, and right now she needed it. "All right," he said. She had not expected it to be that simple. She waited for the qualifier. It came. "There's one more thing you need to know," Damien said. He looked at Vincent briefly, then back at her. "The people behind Harrington, it's Alderton's backers, the money that doesn't trace to Marcus Harrington. My people identified them this morning." "Who are they?" A consortium connected to the Delacroix family. He watched her face. She kept it still because she had become very good at keeping her face still, but she understood what he was telling her immediately. The Delacroix family was one of 3 crime organizations on the East Coast that had spent the better part of a decade attempting to fracture the Blackwood Syndicate's operations. They've been looking for a point of entry for 4 years. Chloe Harrington gave them an elegant one: a personal relationship with the target, inside access to his organization, and the ability to create chaos in his personal life that would compromise his decision-making. "And remove his most reliable advisor," Evelyn said quietly. Damien looked at her. Something moved across his face that she couldn't categorize. "You were," he said. "You were. Whatever else. You understood the operation better than anyone except Vincent." She was not going to be moved by this. She was not. She noted the feeling that wanted to rise in her chest, and she acknowledged it, and she set it aside the way you set aside something fragile that you cannot afford to drop right now. "I'm telling you this," he continued, "because the Delacroix operation is not finished. Removing Chloe, and she will be removed today, before this day ends, does not close the vulnerability. They know your name. They know your connection to me. The misappropriation claim has your name in a public document now. That doesn't disappear when the case is dropped." The room was very quiet. "What are you saying?" Robert said from beside her. "I'm saying," Damien said, with the patience of a man explaining something he wished he didn't have to, "that Evelyn is a target, not because of anything she did, because of who she is to me, was to me." He corrected himself without inflection. "And because the Delacroix family has resources, and they have already demonstrated a willingness to use an indirect method that involves putting her in a situation that could kill her." Evelyn thought about the strawberry parfait, presented with both hands and a smile so clean it could have passed for genuine. She thought about a staircase. She thought about a misappropriation claim filed through a third-party attorney in a way that would attract exactly the right prosecutorial attention. These were not separate events. They were a sequence. And a sequence had a next step. "San Francisco," she said. Damien blinked. It was the first time she had seen him surprised in this conversation. "I have a professional opportunity in San Francisco," she said. "I was considering it before any of this. I'm accelerating the timeline." She looked at him steadily. "I am not running. I am making a professional decision that I will document as such, that I will announce publicly through my firm, and that has nothing to do with any of this. But the practical effect is that I will be on the other side of the country within 30 days. "That's not enough distance," Damien said. "If they decide, then handle it," she said sharply. "That is your operation. That is your world. I am not part of it. I am leaving it. What you do to secure the perimeter of your own empire is yours to manage." She stood up. Robert stood with her. "I need the misappropriation claim dropped, and I need the divorce proceeding uncontested within 72 hours. In return, everything I have, the Alderton documentation, the Delacroix connection as I understand it, every piece of evidence I gathered and handed to Vincent, stays with your organization's response and does not go to Ellison or any other prosecutor." Damien looked at her for a long moment. She felt the weight of it, 12 years of a life they'd built and then unmade, compressed into a negotiation across a conference table. The grief she'd seen on his face when she came in was still there, underneath the executive composure, and she chose not to look directly at it because she understood that if she looked at it long enough, it would cost her something she could not afford to spend. "Done," he said. She nodded once, picked up her bag, walked to the door. "Evelyn." His voice stopped her at the threshold. She turned. He was still sitting at the table, and he looked for just a moment like a man who had been very certain of something and was not certain anymore. Not of the situation, but of himself. "I'm sorry. For the laughing, He stopped, started again. "I didn't understand what she was. I should have." She stood in the doorway and looked at him across the length of the room. She thought about 27 years old in a Connecticut estate and the specific way he had walked toward her and the feeling of being completely chosen. She thought about a bathroom floor and a text at 6:59 in the morning and the weight of a marriage that had slowly become a place where she disappeared. "You should have," she said. She walked out. In the elevator going down, Robert stood beside her and did not say anything until the lobby, when he said quietly, "San Francisco." "Yes," she said. "When do we tell Marcus?" Tomorrow, she said. First thing. The elevator doors opened. She walked through the lobby, through the glass doors, out into the afternoon. The city was doing what it always did. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed the cold October air and felt for the first time in weeks the specific sensation of a decision that is not reactive but chosen, something she was moving toward rather than away from. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered it because she had learned in the past 3 weeks that ignoring unknown numbers was a luxury she could no longer afford. The voice on the other end was female, calm, with a precision that had the quality of someone who had rehearsed the sentence but was trying not to sound like it. Mrs. Blackwood, the voice said. My name is Claire Voss. I'm a journalist with the Times. I'm working on a story about the Blackwood organization, and I've received documentation that I'd like to discuss with you before we go to print. Some of it has your name on it. Evelyn stood on the sidewalk. A cab moved past. Someone's phone rang nearby. The city went on. What documentation? She said. Financial records, Claire Voss said, and a photograph. From the anniversary dinner, Mrs. Blackwood. A pause. You should see it before it publishes. The Delacroix family, Evelyn thought. Not finished, already moving to the next step. She looked up at the sky above the buildings. Narrow strip of gray October, the particular color of a city preparing for something, and understood that the next 30 days were not going to be what she had planned, and that whatever she had been before this moment, whatever version of herself she had been operating on, was not going to be sufficient for what was coming next. She called Claire Voss back from inside a coffee shop 3 blocks from the building where she'd met Damien, because she needed walls around her and the sound of other people existing, and a table she could put her hands flat on while she thought. Tell me what you have, Evelyn said. Claire Voss was careful. She was the kind of journalist who had learned that the first conversation with a subject was about establishing enough trust to get a second conversation, and she modulated accordingly, giving enough to demonstrate she was serious, withholding enough to maintain leverage. She had financial records, she said again, transfers, account numbers, and a photograph taken at the anniversary dinner at the moment. Evelyn's reaction began. Someone at the table had captured it on a phone, and what it showed was Evelyn's face in the first seconds of the allergic response, and Damien's face turned away, toward Chloe, and Chloe's expression, which Claire Voss described as, she paused here, choosing her word, composed. Who gave you the photograph? Evelyn asked. I can't tell you that. Was it the same person who gave you the financial records? A pause. I can tell you that the documentation came to me through a source who has a financial interest in the Blackwood organization becoming less stable. Delacroix. Or Alderton. Or both. Moving in concert. Using a journalist the way they'd used a prosecutor and an assistant and a strawberry parfait as a precision tool aimed at a specific weakness. What's your publication date? Evelyn asked. 2 weeks. Possibly less if the legal team signs off sooner. 2 weeks. She sat in the coffee shop with the noise of the city around her and did the math. The divorce would be finalized within 72 hours, per Damien's agreement. The misappropriation claim would be dropped. But a published story in the Times with her name in it, with a photograph, with financial records presented without context, that was a different instrument entirely. That was reputational. That was the kind of thing that followed a person across state lines, across career transitions, across the distance between the woman she'd been and the woman she was building. I'd like to meet, Evelyn said. In person, before anything publishes. I'd welcome that, Claire said. There was something in her voice, not quite sympathy, but professional recognition, the acknowledgement of a person who had identified another person operating under significant pressure and found them interesting. They agreed on the following morning. Evelyn hung up and sat with her coffee for a moment, and then she called Marcus. I need everything we have on the Whitmore project organized and transferable, she said. Client files, correspondence, the permit situation. I need it in a format that could be handed to another lead designer without losing continuity. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, are you leaving the firm? I'm restructuring it, she said. You're going to run the New York operation. I'm going to San Francisco. Another pause. Longer. When? 30 days. Maybe less. She heard him exhale. Not with surprise exactly, but with the sound of someone receiving information they'd been half expecting and hadn't fully prepared for anyway. "Okay," he said. "I'll have the Whitmore files organized by tomorrow." "Marcus." She stopped. "You're going to be good at this." "I know," he said, which was exactly the right answer, and she was glad she'd hired him. She spent the next 2 hours in that coffee shop writing emails she should have written weeks ago, to clients, carefully worded, establishing the continuity of service without triggering concern, to her accountant about the structural separation of the San Francisco operation, to Alexander Sterling's assistant, confirming the meeting she'd tentatively agreed to for the following week. Each email had the quality of a door opening, and the cumulative effect of writing them, one after another, was something she hadn't expected: momentum. The specific forward sensation of a person who has stopped managing a situation and started constructing a future. She was on the last email when her phone rang. Vincent Marr. "Chloe Harrington left Blackwood Tower at 2:47 this afternoon," he said without greeting. "She did not return." "Did she go voluntarily?" "She was informed that her employment was terminated and that her access to the building and all Blackwood accounts had been revoked, and she was escorted to the lobby. She appeared—" A pause. "Unsurprised." Evelyn set down her coffee. She was expecting it. "My read as well." Vincent's voice was flat. "I was not a man who communicated alarm easily, which was why the quality of his flatness right now registered as the particular tone of someone who is containing something larger than flatness." She also received a package before she left the building, delivered by courier. "We have the courier on camera, but the originating address is false." She opened it in the lobby, which is unusual. People generally don't open packages in lobbies. And then she left. "What was in it?" "We don't know. She took it with her." Evelyn looked out the window of the coffee shop at the street. A man was walking a dog with the distracted energy of someone who was late for something. Two women were sharing an umbrella against a wind that had come up while Evelyn had been inside. The ordinary afternoon continued to happen. "She's been activated," Evelyn said. "That's a reasonable interpretation." The Delacroix people told her the internal operation is blown and gave her a next instruction. "Yes," Vincent said, "that's my concern." She understood what he wasn't saying. Chloe's internal operation, the slow destabilization of Damien from within, was finished. She had been removed. The Delacroix investment in 18 months of patient work had just been zeroed out. Organizations like that did not accept that kind of loss without a response that was proportionate to the investment. And the most efficient response, from their position, was not to start over. It was to take the one remaining action that would cause the maximum damage in the minimum time. "She knows I'm leaving," Evelyn said. "She knows about San Francisco. Damien knew when I told him, and whatever security isn't tight enough." "It wasn't from Damien's side," Vincent said. "We've been running clean since this morning." A pause. "But the Times journalist." Evelyn went cold. "Voss. If Voss's source is Delacroix adjacent, then the call you took this afternoon was also information going the other direction. The moment you told her you wanted a meeting, you told them you're still in New York, still manageable, and that you're worried enough about the story to engage." She sat very still. The coffee shop noise continued around her, the grinder, two people laughing, a child asking for something in a voice pitched at exactly the frequency of insistence. "Tell Damien," she said. "He knows. He's the one who asked me to call you." A brief silence. "I want you somewhere with his people tonight." "No," she said immediately. "Evelyn, I am not going back inside that structure. I don't care about the risk level. If I put myself under Blackwood protection tonight, I never actually leave. That's not—" She stopped, took a breath. "I'll go to a hotel. Different from last night. I won't tell anyone which one until I'm already there. That's as much as I'm willing to do." Vincent was quiet for a moment. "He's not going to like that." "He doesn't have to like it." She stood up, put on her coat. "Tell him I said thank you for the information. Tell him the rest of our business goes through Robert Kane." She paid for the coffee and walked out into the city. She chose a hotel in Chelsea, paid cash at the front desk. An old habit from a marriage to a man who had taught her, by example, that cash was the least traceable form of movement, and was in a room on the 11th floor by 7 o'clock. She ordered food. She did not turn on the television. She sat at the small desk by the window and opened her laptop and looked at the email from Alexander Sterling and then looked at the San Francisco skyline in a photograph she had pulled up. All fog and vertical light, and the particular geometry of a city built on hills, which felt, from this distance, like the right metaphor, though she was careful not to put too much weight on metaphors because she was a practical woman and metaphors had never paid a lease. She worked until 10. She slept, which surprised her. A deep, dreamless sleep, the sleep of someone who has expended everything the day asked and has nothing left over for anxiety to work with. She woke at 6 to her phone ringing. Robert. The misappropriation claim has been withdrawn, he said. Filed at 9 o'clock last night. The divorce final hearing is scheduled for Friday, 2 days. A pause. He moved fast. He always does, when he decides to. She sat up. The Voss story. I've been on the phone with the Times legal department since 5:30. We formally contested the financial documentation on the grounds that it's been presented without business context and constitutes defamatory misrepresentation. They're reviewing. It buys us time. Not indefinitely, but enough. He paused. And Evelyn, the photograph. What about it? I've seen it. He was quiet for a moment. The quiet of a man who has looked at something and needs a moment to decide how to describe it accurately without being unkind. It's not flattering to Damien. The way the image is composed, whether it was intentional or not, it captures exactly what you described. His back, essentially, to you. And Chloe's face, which is, she's looking at the camera. It's possible she saw it being taken. Evelyn thought about that. About a woman who had planned the entire evening and would, of course, have identified every phone in the room that was pointed in a direction that could become useful later. She wanted it taken, Evelyn said. That's my reading too. Robert's voice shifted slightly. Which means the photograph was always going to be part of the endgame. The question is whether the endgame was always this, the time story, the public pressure, or whether it's been accelerated. Accelerated, she said. The internal operation failed. This is the contingency. Then we need to accelerate as well. I'm going to file for a gag order on the publication of your name in connection with the Blackwood Criminal Organization investigation. It's a long shot, but it creates another legal obstacle. He took a breath. And Evelyn, your meeting with Voss today. Be very careful what you confirm. She's not the enemy, but she's not your ally. She met Claire Voss at a cafe in the West Village at 10 in the morning. Voss was younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s, compact, with the kind of watchful stillness that Evelyn associated with people who spent a lot of time listening in rooms where other people were trying to control what was said. She had a notebook she didn't open and a recorder she placed on the table face up, which Evelyn appreciated for its transparency. Off the record, Evelyn said before she sat down. Voss looked at the recorder. Then I'll put that away. She did. Off the record. I want to see the photograph. Voss pulled out a tablet. Evelyn looked at the photograph for the first time. It was, as Robert had said, exactly what she'd described. It was also worse, because a description is architecture and a photograph is the building, and looking at it meant looking at her own face. In the first moment she understood what was happening to her, the expression of a woman whose body is beginning to fail while her mind is still trying to catch up. And the contrast between that and the turned back and the composed, watchful face of the woman who had made it happen was not something that required interpretation. The source who gave you this, Evelyn said. They gave it to you because they want the Blackwood organization damaged. Voss held her gaze. I can't confirm or deny. I'm not asking you to confirm it for publication. I'm telling you what I know, off the record, so that you can understand what you're inside of. She set the tablet down. The people who gave you this material are using your story as a weapon in a criminal operation against Damien Blackwood. The financial records you received were filed publicly last week as part of a fraudulent misappropriation claim against me, a claim that was withdrawn yesterday because it has no merit. If you publish those records, you are publishing documents that have already been legally determined to be without foundation. Voss was quiet. She was thinking, Evelyn could see, with the particular quality of concentration of a person who has just had the frame of their story shifted and is deciding whether to accept the new frame or defend the old one. The photograph, Evelyn continued, was taken by someone who staged the moment it captures. The woman in it, the assistant, knew the camera was there. She may have arranged for it to be there. She folded her hands on the table. You have a real story. The operation that's been run against this marriage for 18 months. The deliberate targeting of a person for financial and physical harm. That's a story. But the story your current source wants you to publish is not that story. It's a tool. Claire Voss looked at her for a long time. If I go in the direction you're describing, she said slowly, I'd need documentation. A source I can use on record. Robert Kane, Evelyn said. My attorney. He has everything. Voss picked up the recorder from where she'd put it away and set it back on the table and looked at it, and then at Evelyn. On record? Selectively, Evelyn said. With ground rules. Yes. She left the cafe an hour later. The wind had come up again, the specific cold of New York in late October that feels personal, like it's aimed at you. She pulled her coat tighter and walked 2 blocks and stood at a corner and called Robert and told him what she'd agreed to. He was quiet for a long time, then, that was either very smart or very dangerous. I think it's both, she said. I'll call Voss this afternoon. She spent the next 2 days in a state of sustained hypervigilance that she recognized, on the intellectual level, as exhausting, and experienced, on the physical level, as a kind of enforced clarity. Every decision was immediate and tactical. She booked her flight to San Francisco for the week after the divorce was finalized. She formally notified her firm's clients of the leadership transition through a letter she and Marcus had drafted together, presenting the change as a planned strategic expansion rather than a sudden departure. She had a video call with Alexander Sterling, the man himself, not his assistant, which lasted 40 minutes, and in which she assessed him the way she assessed everyone she was considering working with, for the specific texture of how he treated information, which was a more reliable indicator than any credential or reputation. He was direct. He did not perform. He did not soften things for her or perform concern in a way that was really about his own comfort. When she described the kind of project she wanted to build in San Francisco, he asked 2 questions that demonstrated he had actually heard her and engaged with the substance of what she'd said, not the surface. She told him she would be there in 10 days. The divorce was finalized on a Friday morning in a hearing that lasted 22 minutes. Damien's lawyers did not contest a single line. She sat in the courtroom and signed her name and walked out into the gray November morning, and when the doors closed behind her, she stood on the steps for exactly 1 moment. 1. And then she walked down to where Robert was waiting. Done, she said. Done, he confirmed. She flew to San Francisco on a Wednesday morning, 2 weeks after she'd decided to go, which was faster than she'd thought possible and slower than it had felt from the inside. She took a window seat and watched New York diminish beneath the clouds, and felt something she was not yet ready to call relief, but that had relief somewhere in its composition, along with exhaustion and the specific soreness of a person who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has only just set it down and is still registering the absence of the weight. She had been in San Francisco for 11 days when the resort project arrived. Alexander Sterling's development company had been in early-stage negotiations with a hospitality group for a sustainable resort complex on the Northern California coast. A project that was, by any measure, exactly the kind of work Evelyn had been building toward for the last several years of her career. Large-scale, design-forward, with a client who had both the budget and the stated commitment to do it properly. Alexander had mentioned it in their video call as something that might align with her practice. He had not oversold it. He had described it accurately and let her decide. She decided. She was 3 days into the preliminary design consultation when she learned who else was at the negotiating table. The hospitality group had a primary investor. The primary investor had a representative. The representative's name was Damien Blackwood. She stood in Alexander Sterling's conference room and looked at the briefing document with the particular stillness of a person who has just been informed of something they'd believed they were done with, and felt. Underneath the steadiness she had built with such deliberate effort over the past weeks, the old exhaustion rise briefly and then settle, just settle. Not disappear, she was realistic, but settle, the way a sea settles after a storm, into something that can be navigated even if it can't be fully trusted. You knew, she said to Alexander. He was across the table from her. He had the document open in front of him as well, and he met her eyes without deflection. I knew when I brought you in, he said. I didn't tell you because I didn't think it was my place to make the decision about whether it was a conflict. That's yours. He paused. Is it? She thought about Friday morning in the courtroom. She thought about the 22 minutes and the signature and the door closing behind her. She thought about San Francisco and the hotel room she was renting by the month, while she looked for an apartment in the design studio space she'd toured yesterday that had north-facing windows and original brick and the particular quality of light that she hadn't been able to articulate until she stood inside it and understood that it was what she'd been looking for. "No," she said. "It's not a conflict." She meant it. She was surprised to mean it, and then she was not surprised because she had been learning, in these 11 days, that the distance between New York and San Francisco was not only geographical, and that the person she was becoming in this city was not the person who had lain on a restaurant bathroom floor fighting to breathe. That person was still in her, would always be in her, but she was not organizing herself around that person's fear anymore. She met Damien across the negotiating table 4 days later. He looked different from 1,000 miles of distance and across the formal geometry of a conference room with other people present. He looked, and she searched for the accurate word because accuracy mattered more than comfort, diminished. Not in a way that was satisfying, in a way that was simply true. The particular quality of a man who has revised his understanding of a significant period of his life and is still processing the revision. He did not try to reopen anything personal. She had half expected it, had prepared herself for it on the flight up from the design presentation, but he kept the meeting entirely professional, and his questions were intelligent, and when she presented her preliminary design concepts, he listened with the same kind of full attention he'd always brought to things that interested him, which was the most honest thing about him, and always had been. After the meeting, in the hallway, while Alexander was on a call inside the conference room, Damien stopped beside her. She stopped. They stood in the corridor, and the building around them was quiet in the way that corporate buildings are in the early afternoon when most people are at their desks. "You look good," he said. He stopped. "You look like yourself." She looked at him. "I am myself," she said. "That's relatively new." He nodded, once, with something she recognized as genuine acknowledgement, not an apology. They were past the place where apologies had structural value, but a recognition. The specific kind that comes from a man who has finally understood the full cost of something and is no longer trying to negotiate the bill. "The Delacroix situation," he said quietly. "It's been handled. I assumed it had. Chloe is—" He stopped. "She won't be a problem." She noted what he didn't say. She didn't ask. She had spent 12 years inside the architecture of a world where certain things were resolved in ways she didn't need to know the details of, and she had always maintained the discipline of not asking for details she didn't need, and that discipline served her still. "Then we're done with that," she said. He looked at her for a moment. The hallway was quiet. Somewhere in the building, an elevator opened and closed. "Alexander Sterling," he said, not an accusation, not quite a question. "A colleague," she said, "a good one." Damien nodded again. Then he said quietly, "He's a decent man." She looked at him for a moment with the specific attention of a woman who has learned to hear what people mean when they say things that seem simple. "Yes," she said. "He is." She walked back into the conference room. Alexander was off the phone. He looked up at her when she came in with the particular attention he'd been giving her since the first meeting. Not the attention of attraction performing itself, but the quieter attention of someone who had decided another person was worth watching closely because they kept finding the things worth watching. "Everything all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. She sat down and opened her design folder. "Let's finish the coastal elevation review." The resort project moved into its next phase 2 weeks later, and by that time Evelyn had signed a lease on the studio space with the north-facing windows. And Marcus had handled the first 3 client presentations from the New York office without calling her once, which was the highest professional compliment she knew how to receive. And she had started running in the mornings along the waterfront because she'd always meant to start running and had never had mornings that felt like hers before. She was on a site visit to the resort property, a stretch of Northern California coast that had the particular wild quality of land that has not yet been shaped, all wind-bent grass and gray-green water, and the specific vastness that comes from standing on the edge of a continent. When she got the call from a number she recognized as one of Damien's personal lines, she almost didn't answer. She stood on the cliff edge with the wind pulling at her coat and looked at the number and made a decision in the 4 seconds before it went to voicemail. She answered. It was not Damien. It was Sandra Blackwood. Her voice was different from the last time. Not the controlled formidability of a woman managing a situation, but something underneath that, something older and less defended. "Evelyn," she said, "I need to tell you something. Damien asked me to call. He didn't want to call himself." "What happened?" "He's ill," Sandra said. "He's been ill for some time, we've learned. The doctors found it, stomach cancer, they're saying, and it's advanced." She paused. "He wanted you to know from family, not from news." Evelyn stood on the cliff edge with the Pacific wind against her and the world going on in its continuous, indifferent way, and she held the phone and felt the information arrive the way certain information does. Not with shock exactly, but with the particular weight of something that confirms a shape you hadn't consciously recognized until the moment it was named. "How long?" she asked. Sandra's voice was very steady, with the specific steadiness of a woman who has been keeping herself together through an act of will and knows precisely how much will it's costing. "They're not saying with certainty. Not long." Evelyn looked at the water. The site below her was where the resort's main structure would eventually stand, if the project moved forward, which it would, because she was going to make it move forward, because that was the work, and the work was real and present and entirely hers. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "He asked. He wanted to know if you would see him, once. Not to—" Sandra stopped, started again. "He said he's not asking for anything. He just wants to see you." The wind came up again, harder, and she turned her back to it and looked inland at the hills, which were the particular golden color of California in the dry season, and thought about a man lying in a hospital bed in New York, having finally arrived at the understanding that there is no empire and no power and no amount of ruthlessness that returns the years you took from the person who loved you most when you had the chance to deserve it. She thought about herself, standing here on this cliff, with her firm and her studio and her mornings that belonged to her. She thought about the strawberry parfait, placed with both hands and a smile. She thought about Chloe Harrington, who was somewhere that Damien had called handled, and about the 11 days in this city that had felt like breathing for the first time in a year, and about Alexander Sterling asking, "Everything all right?" from across a conference table with the attention of someone who had decided she was worth watching closely. She made a decision. "Tell him I'll come," she said. "Once, at the end of the week." She hung up and stood on the cliff for another minute. Below her, the Pacific was doing what the Pacific does. Enormous, continuous, indifferent to the specific mathematics of human grief, moving at its own scale and in its own time. She watched it for a moment, and then she put her phone in her pocket and turned back to the site, where her assistant was waiting with the elevation schematics, and she walked back to work. She was 40 yards from the temporary site office when she heard it. Not a sound exactly, but the absence of the right sound. The specific wrongness of weight shifting above her from the scaffolding where the survey crew had been working that morning, and she had time only to register it before Alexander Sterling came from her left and hit her with his full body weight, driving both of them sideways across the grass, and the steel support beam came down where she had been standing with a sound like the end of something. The ground came up hard. She hit it on her side, one hand out, gravel into her palm, the breath knocked completely out of her. Alexander landed half across her and rolled immediately, checking her face, her arms. "Are you... I'm..." She couldn't get air. She pressed her hand flat against the ground and focused on breathing. One breath. Another. The beam had taken out a section of the temporary fencing 20 feet to her left. The scaffolding structure above it was still moving, creaking, settling into the new geometry of having lost a critical support. The survey crew was shouting. Her assistant was running toward them. Alexander was already on his feet, one hand still on her shoulder, the other at his phone. She sat up. Her hand was bleeding. Not badly, a surface cut from the gravel, but bleeding the way hands do, with more drama than the injury deserves. She looked at it and then looked up at the scaffolding, which had not fallen incorrectly, which had fallen with the specific geometry of something that had been adjusted. "That wasn't structural failure," she said. Alexander looked down at her. His face was not afraid exactly. The face of a man who had moved before he thought and was now catching up with what he'd moved toward. "No," he said. "It wasn't." "Call Vincent Marr," she said. "The number is in my contacts. Tell him what just happened and tell him the scaffold bolt configuration needs to be photographed before anyone touches it." Alexander looked at her for 1 second with an expression that she would think about later. That specific look of a person who has just seen someone they've been paying attention to confirm everything they suspected in a moment of crisis by knowing exactly what to do. And then he called the number. She sat on the ground with her bleeding hand and her recovered breath and looked at the beam lying in the grass where she'd been standing and understood that handled had a different meaning than she'd assumed and that Chloe Harrington had not in fact been finished. She stood up. Slowly, because her side ached where she'd hit the ground, but steadily, because she had run out of capacity for being anything other than steady. She stood up and she looked at the site and she looked at the beam and she looked at Alexander Sterling, who was on the phone with Vincent Marr and who had pulled her out of the way of something that would have killed her without pausing to calculate the cost. "Tell him," she said to Alexander, "that she's still active. Tell him she's in California." Alexander relayed it, listened. Then he held the phone out to her. She took it. "Vincent." "I heard." His voice was the same flat tone that she had learned to read as controlled urgency. "We have a vehicle that left a service road adjacent to the site 20 minutes before the beam fell. We've been tracking it." "Where is she?" "Heading south." A pause. "Evelyn, don't go back to your studio tonight. Don't go back to anywhere you've been in a regular pattern. Do you have somewhere?" "Yes," she said. She looked at Alexander, who was looking at her with the steady attention she had begun, over the past weeks, to count on in the specific way you count on things that have proven reliable under pressure. "I have somewhere." She handed the phone back to Alexander, and he finished the call, and they stood together on the California cliff with the Pacific behind them, and the downed beam in the grass, and the scaffolding crew standing at a distance that said they understood something significant had just happened, but not yet what. "The project," Alexander said. "The project continues," she said. "We pause the site work until the structure is re-inspected and secure. Everything else continues." He looked at her for a moment. "You're not afraid," he said. It wasn't quite a question, but it had the shape of one. "I'm afraid," she said. "I just don't have time to be afraid in a way that changes what needs to happen next." She picked up her design folder from where it had fallen in the grass. Checked the elevation schematics. The paper was bent at one corner but readable. "We have a design review scheduled for Thursday. I'd like to move it to your office." "Consider it moved," Alexander said. She nodded. They walked back toward the site office, and the wind came off the Pacific, and the grass moved the way grass does in coastal wind, constantly, without resistance. The specific flexibility of something that has learned to move with the force rather than against it. And she walked through it and thought about Chloe Harrington in a vehicle heading south, and about Vincent Marr tracking it, and about a hospital room in New York where Damien was lying stripped of everything except what he actually was, and about a design studio with north-facing windows waiting for her to fill it with work. She thought about what it would take to finish this. Not the project, not the career, not the life she was building, which was real and solid and entirely hers. She thought about what it would take to finish the part that wasn't finished yet, the last move in an 18-month operation against her that had survived the withdrawal of its primary instrument and adapted and sent that instrument across a country to a construction site on a cliff. And she understood, with the cold clarity that had replaced most of her other modes of processing in the past several weeks, that the finishing was going to require something she had been avoiding. It was going to require her to stop waiting for someone else's operation to protect her and to become, herself, the person who closed it. She had the evidence. She had Robert. She had Vincent's network and Damien's belated willingness to act. She had Alexander Sterling, who had not calculated the risk of moving before he moved. What she had not done, what she had been too careful, too procedural, too committed to the legal and formal structures of her response to do, was bring all of it together into a single simultaneous action that left no operational space for adaptation. She was going to do that now. She sat down in the site office at the temporary desk and opened her laptop and began to write. And what she wrote was not a design specification or a client letter, but a detailed, precise, documented account of every action taken against her over the past 18 months, organized chronologically, cross-referenced with the evidence in Robert's files, addressed to 3 recipients simultaneously: the DA's office, the Times investigative desk, and a federal organized crime task force whose contact information Vincent Marr had given her 6 days ago just in case, he'd said, with the specific tone of a man who had been around long enough to know that just in case was often the most important category. She wrote for 2 hours. The site crew worked around her. Alexander sat across the desk on his own laptop, working through the project logistics, present without intruding, which was the thing she had noticed first about him and continued to value most, the ability to be in a space without colonizing it. When she finished, she read it through once, then she sent it. Then she called Robert and told him what she'd done. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That's going to move very fast." "That's the point," she said. "Chloe Harrington will know within hours that the filing has been made." "I know." "She may—" "I know," Evelyn said again. "Robert, she was on a cliff today. She was close enough that if Alexander hadn't—" She stopped. Started again. "I'm done managing this at the pace she's setting. I'm setting the pace now." Another silence. She could hear him deciding, the specific quality of a lawyer's silence when he is weighing the risk calculus of a decision his client has already made and determining whether to argue or to move with it. "I'll file the formal affidavit to accompany the DA submission first thing tomorrow," he said. "Tonight," she said. "Tonight," he said. She hung up. Alexander was looking at her across the desk. She met his eyes. "She's going to come here," Evelyn said, "tonight or tomorrow. She has nothing left to lose and the operation is collapsing, and she's the kind of person who, when everything else fails, goes back to the most direct method." "Which is?" Alexander said. Evelyn looked at him steadily. "Me," she said. Alexander held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, once, with the decisiveness of a man who has made a calculation and committed to it. "Then we're ready for her," he said. She looked at him, at the specific quality of the steadiness in his face, which was not the steadiness of a man performing courage, but the steadiness of a man who had been paying attention and had made a decision he was not going to reconsider, and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time, the specific grounded weight of not being alone in something. "Yes," she said. "We are." Outside, the Pacific wind moved across the cliff, and the sight lights came on against the early dark. And somewhere to the south, a vehicle was moving through California in the direction of a woman who had just stopped waiting to be found and started deciding how the story ended. She did not sleep that night, not because she was afraid, or not only because of that, but because the particular quality of waiting for something you know is coming has a texture that is incompatible with rest. She lay on the bed in Alexander's guest room, which was on the second floor of a house in the Marion Headlands that he used when site work ran late. And she looked at the ceiling and listened to the Pacific and thought with the careful precision of a person who has stripped everything unnecessary from their thinking and arrived at the essential architecture of a situation. Chloe was moving south. Vincent's people were tracking the vehicle. The federal filing had gone in at 9:47 the previous evening, and Robert had filed the accompanying affidavit at 11:12, which meant that by morning there would be people in offices in San Francisco and Washington whose job it was to move on what she'd sent them. The machinery had been set in motion. It was large and it was legitimate and it was irreversible. It was also slow. Chloe Harrington was not slow. She had demonstrated across 18 months a particular genius for moving inside the gap between when a threat is identified and when the institutional response to it arrives. She had operated in that gap, in the space between what Damien knew and what Damien acted on, between what Evelyn suspected and what she could prove, between what the legal system could see and what was actually happening, with a patience and a precision that Evelyn had come to understand as the most dangerous thing about her. She would know the filings had gone in. Possibly she'd known within the hour. The question was not whether she would come. The question was how. At 4 in the morning, Evelyn got up and went to the kitchen and made coffee and sat at the table and looked at the dark window and waited. Alexander came down at 4:30 without being surprised to find her there, which told her that he had not slept much either. He made himself coffee without speaking and sat across from her, and they sat together in the dark kitchen with the Pacific wind against the windows and said nothing for a while, which was its own kind of communication. "The site office," she said eventually. He looked at her. "She'll go to the site first. That's where I was. That's the last location in my pattern that she has confirmed." She turned her in her hands. "She doesn't know about this house. Vincent's people are at the site. I know." She thought about it. "I need to be there too." Alexander set his mug down. No. Not as a target, she said, as the person who closes this. If she comes to the site and finds Vincent's people and no Evelyn, she adapts. She has resources we don't fully understand. She disappears into the next phase of the operation, and this goes on. She looked at him. She needs to see me. She needs to believe it ends the way she planned it, right up until the moment it doesn't. Alexander looked at her for a long time. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the first gray suggestion of morning was beginning at the horizon above the headlands, the sky lightening by increments that were barely visible but continuous. "You're going to use yourself as the mechanism," he said. "I've been the mechanism since she put that plate in front of me," Evelyn said. "The difference is that this time I'm the one deciding how it runs." He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "I'm coming with you." "I know," she said. They drove to the site at 5:15, before full light. Vincent Marr met them at the access road with two of his people, large men with the particular quiet of people who have done this kind of work long enough to have stopped narrating it, and they walked the perimeter of the site together while the sky came up gray and cold over the Pacific. Vincent had the vehicle location from the overnight tracking. It had stopped moving at 2 in the morning, at a motel 12 miles south. It had not moved since. "She's waiting for daylight," Evelyn said. "Yes," Vincent said. "She'll come in through the service road. Same route the vehicle used yesterday. We have it covered." She walked to the edge of the cliff where the beam had fallen. The beam was still in the grass. It hadn't been moved because it was evidence, and the site had been formally flagged as a crime scene pending inspection. She stood where she'd been standing when Alexander pulled her sideways and looked at the spot, and felt the specific physical memory of the ground coming up, and the gravel, and the breath leaving her body, and she let herself feel it for exactly the time it took to feel it, and then she set it aside. She needed to be clear. Not calm. Calm was a performance, and she was done performing. Clear. The specific internal state of a person who has removed everything that isn't load-bearing and is operating on what remains. She positioned herself in the center of the site, near the temporary office, visible from the service road. Alexander stood 20 feet to her left, at an angle that looked casual and was not. Vincent's people were in position she couldn't see, which was the point. They waited. The sun cleared the eastern hills at 6:48, and the site filled with the low flat light of an early California morning, everything casting long shadows, the cliff edge sharp against the water. A crane that had been idle since the incident stood against the sky like punctuation. At 7:12, a car came down the service road. Evelyn watched it park, watched the door open, watched Chloe Harrington step out. She looked different from the last time Evelyn had seen her, in the penthouse, wearing the anniversary necklace, glass of wine in hand, occupying the room with the ease of someone who had won. That version of Chloe had been composed, arranged. The version who walked across the construction site in the early morning light was not composed. Her clothes were wrong for the location. She had not planned for the terrain, which told Evelyn she had driven through the night in whatever she'd been wearing and had not stopped to think about anything except arrival. Her face had the specific tightness of someone who has been awake too long and is running on the particular fuel of an intention that has become the only organizing principle remaining. She saw Evelyn, and she stopped. They were 60 feet apart. The site was quiet. The Pacific wind moved the grass at the cliff edge. Somewhere behind Evelyn, she could hear the low frequency of Vincent's people being exactly where they needed to be without making a sound. "You filed," Chloe said. Her voice carried clearly in the morning air. "Yes," Evelyn said. "Federal." Not a question. "And the DA. And the Times." Evelyn kept her voice even. "It's done, Chloe." Chloe's jaw moved. She was processing. Evelyn could see it, the specific calculation of a person assessing whether there is still a move available. Her right hand was at her side in a way that had the quality of restraint, a hand that was making a decision about what it was going to do. "You don't understand what you've ended," she said. "Tell me." A short sound, not quite a laugh. 9 years. She took a step forward. Evelyn did not step back. "My father spent 9 years, but my whole family spent 9 years rebuilding after what Blackwood did to us. Do you know what it's like to watch someone take everything your father built and walk away without consequences? While your family..." She stopped. Something moved through her face. You were in the way, that's all. You were just in the way. I know, Evelyn said. I know what your father lost. I know what Damien's organization did to your family. She kept her voice level. Not hard. Level. That was real. Your family's grievance was real. Chloe blinked. She had not expected this. What your father was owed, the money, the contract, the dignity of it, that was real, Evelyn said. And there were ways to pursue that, legal ways, legitimate ways that didn't require... She stopped, chose the next words carefully. You put strawberries in front of me. You knew what they would do. You stood in that restaurant and you watched and you adjusted the plate and then you watched me fall and you were in the way, Chloe said again. Her voice had changed, lower, less composed, the voice of someone for whom repetition has become a way of holding something together. If you had just left, if you had just... I wasn't going to leave, Evelyn said. Not because of you, because it was my marriage and my life, and I had the right to stay in it. She paused. You made me leave. You made it impossible to stay, and you almost killed me doing it, and Damien didn't see it, and I spent a year thinking that was the worst thing, that he didn't see. She looked at Chloe directly. But you're worse, because you saw everything. You saw exactly what you were doing, and you did it anyway, and you called it justice. Chloe's right hand moved. Alexander moved at the same moment, not toward Evelyn, but to the left, cutting the angle. And Vincent's two people came from the positions Evelyn hadn't been able to see, and they were fast. The way people with that kind of training are fast, without wasted motion. And Chloe had the knife, a small, fixed-blade thing that looked wrong against the California morning light, too small for the weight of everything that had brought it here, for approximately 4 seconds before it was no longer in her hand. She did not go quietly. She was not the kind of person who did anything quietly. Evelyn understood now. The quiet had always been a performance, the same way the composure had been a performance. And underneath both of them was this, a woman with a family grievance that had curdled over 9 years into something that had consumed the person who was supposed to be carrying it. Vincent's people had her on the ground. One of them was on the phone. The other was holding her wrist with the careful, impersonal grip of someone doing a job. And Chloe was not fighting anymore. She had gone still, the particular stillness of someone who has exhausted their last option and is now in the aftermath. Evelyn stood and watched. Her heart was loud in her ears. Her hands were steady. She noted the steadiness the way she'd been noting it, over and over, for the past several weeks, with something that was not quite pride and not quite surprise, but was located somewhere between them. Alexander was beside her, not touching her, just present, in the specific way she had come to count on. Are you all right? He said. Yes, she said. She looked at Chloe on the ground, and what she felt was not satisfaction, which she'd been half afraid it would be, but something closer to sorrow. The particular sorrow of seeing a person who might have been entirely different under different conditions and is instead exactly this, on a California construction site in the early morning, running out of moves. The law enforcement vehicles arrived 14 minutes later, which was fast by any reasonable standard, and felt, after the 4 seconds with the knife, very slow. There were federal agents, The overnight filing had moved faster than she'd expected, which Robert later told her meant there had already been interest at the federal level in the Delacroix network, and Evelyn's submission had given them the documentary basis they'd needed to move. Chloe was read her rights in the morning light and put into a vehicle, and Evelyn watched the vehicle drive back up the service road and thought about the anniversary dinner and the bathroom floor and the paramedics, and Damien's voice discussing real estate 40 feet away. And she thought about all the damage one person with a particular kind of cold patience could do to another person's life. And she thought about the fact that she was standing on a cliff in California in the early morning with the Pacific behind her and the project she was building in front of her, and a person beside her who had thrown himself sideways without calculating the cost. She turned to Alexander. He was looking at her. He had the expression she'd first noticed 3 weeks ago and had been trying to accurately categorize since. Not quite protective, not quite professional, somewhere between the two in a territory that she hadn't fully mapped yet. Thank you, she said. Yesterday, he said. And just now. He looked at her for a moment. You knew she was going to come. I thought she might. You stood there anyway. Yes. He shook his head, not with disapproval, but with something that had the texture of reluctant recognition. Evelyn. I told you, she said. I needed her to see me. I know what you told me, he said. I was there while you told me. A pause. I was also there when she had a knife. You were, she said. You moved before I could. He looked at her for another moment. The morning light was fully up now, the flat gold of a California dawn that has decided to be warm despite the wind, and it was on his face, and she was looking at it and thinking about reliability, the specific texture of it, how rare it was, how different from what she'd spent 12 years calling by that name. The design review is Thursday, she said. Something moved across his face. It is. I'd like to present the coastal elevation revisions. I've been reworking the sight lines from the main terrace, and I think there's a solution that gives the guests both the water view and the wind protection without Evelyn. He said her name with the specific quality of someone who has been patient for a long time and has decided the patience has served its purpose. The review is Thursday. Today is Tuesday. That's 2 days. I know how many days it is. Is there anything, he said carefully, that you're willing to talk about that isn't the project? She looked at him. The cliff edge was behind her. The site spread out to either side, temporary and in process, the skeleton of something that was going to become real. She thought about north-facing windows and morning runs along the waterfront and the specific, surprising feeling of mornings that belonged to her. She thought about being chosen, about the difference between being chosen by someone who wants you and being seen by someone who has been paying attention. Not today, she said. Today I need to call Robert and do the debrief and go over the site security plan, and she stopped. Not today. Okay, he said. No argument, no pressure. The simple accommodation of someone who has understood that this particular person moves at her own pace and that the correct response to that is not to push, but to be consistently present. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he agreed. She called Robert from the site office, and the debrief took 2 hours, and it was detailed and procedural, and she was grateful for the procedural quality of it, the way having specific information to exchange and specific actions to confirm created a structure she could operate inside while the rest of her mind processed what the morning had been. Chloe Harrington was in federal custody. The charges included conspiracy, attempted assault, and a list of financial crimes connected to the Alderton Group and the Delacroix network that Robert said would keep prosecutors occupied for a significant period of time. The Delacroix organization itself was now under federal investigation on multiple fronts, which meant the operational space they'd been using had collapsed. Marcus Harrington, Chloe's father, had been brought in for questioning in New York. And the Times story? Evelyn asked. Claire Voss called me this morning, Robert said. She's going in a different direction. The story she's writing now is, he paused, not what the Delacroix people wanted. She's writing about the operation itself, the deliberate targeting. She's been thorough. Another pause. Your name is in it, but not the way it was going to be. As the subject, Evelyn said, not the suspect. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Robert, she said, thank you for all of it. That's what you pay me for, he said. She could hear, underneath the professional deflection, the particular warmth of a man who has been on her side since the beginning and is glad, in his careful way, that the beginning has led to this. She flew to New York on a Thursday, 4 days later, which was the same day as the design review, and Alexander moved the review to Friday morning and did not make anything of it, which she appreciated more than she said. She did not tell Damien she was coming until she was in the cab from the airport, because she had learned over the past several weeks that announcing intentions too early gave the universe too many opportunities to complicate them. He was in a hospital on the Upper East Side. The room was private and quiet, and his parents were in the hallway when she arrived. His father, whom she'd always found easier than Sandra, shook her hand with both of his and didn't say anything, which was the right response. Sandra looked at her with the specific expression of a woman who has revised her assessment of another woman under circumstances that made the revision both necessary and late, and said quietly, "Thank you for coming." And Evelyn nodded. She went in alone. He was smaller than she remembered. That was the first thing. Not physically. The illness had taken some weight, but not dramatically. But in the specific way that people diminish when the structure they've been operating inside collapses. Damian Blackwood, without his empire, was a man in his early 50s with gray at his temples and hands that had lost some of their stillness, lying in a hospital bed looking at the door when she came in. She sat in the chair beside the bed. She didn't take his hand. She put her hands in her lap and looked at him. And he looked at her. And the room was quiet in the specific way of hospital rooms, which is a quieter quiet than most. "You handled Chloe," he said. "We handled Chloe," she said. "Vincent's people were there. Vincent told me what happened on the cliff." He looked at her steadily. "Alexander Sterling." "Yes." Something moved across his face. "Is he—" "That's not what I'm here to talk about," she said. He accepted this. One of the things she had always respected about him, even at the worst of it, was that he knew when a line had been drawn and he did not attempt to cross it when he understood it was real. "The organization," he said. "The Delacroix investigation is going to hit us on multiple fronts. I know. Vincent is handling it." He paused. He stopped. The word seemed to cost him something to say. "I'm not in a position to handle it." "I know that too." He looked at the window. There was a view of a building across the street and a narrow strip of sky, gray in November, the specific color of a city preparing for winter. "I keep thinking about the dinner," he said. "I've been thinking about it since Vincent showed me everything. He stopped again. The stopping had a different quality from his usual pauses. Not calculation, but something more unguarded. "I can hear myself in that hallway, in my memory. I can hear my own voice, and I can't—" He turned back to look at her. "I can't make the person I hear in that memory make sense to me. I know it was me. I know I said it. I know I was talking about the resort and she was— You were— Damien." She said his name quietly. Not to stop him. To locate him. The way you use someone's name when they're in a place they can't quite find their way back from on their own. "You believed what she showed you. She was very good at showing you what she needed you to see." "I should have seen through it." "Yes," she said. "You should have. Earlier than you did." She paused. But the man who ran the Blackwood Syndicate for 20 years was not going to be brought down by an obvious operation. She wasn't obvious. She was precise. She understood your blind spots because she spent 9 years studying them. He was quiet. She could see him deciding whether to accept this as absolution, which she was not offering it as. "It's not an excuse," she said. "The fact that she was good at it doesn't change what happened to me in that bathroom. It doesn't change the staircase. It doesn't change the year of it, the year of you choosing her version over mine, every time, without looking closely enough." She kept her voice even. Not angry, not forgiving, accurate. "You did that. She exploited it, but you did it." "I know," he said. "I need you to know it without the explanation," she said. "I'm not telling you the explanation to make you feel better. I'm telling you because it's true, and because the truth is the only thing that matters here." She looked at him. "You loved someone. You trusted her. She used that, and you failed me because of it." She let that sit between them for a moment. All three of those things are true at the same time. He looked at her for a long time. His eyes were doing something she hadn't seen them do before, in 12 years of marriage. A particular openness that had the quality of a man who has been stripped of the tools he usually uses to manage what he shows, and is looking at another person without them for the first time. "I'm sorry," he said. She breathed. The room was quiet. Through the window, the narrow strip of sky had gone a slightly lighter gray, the way New York afternoons do in November when the cloud cover shifts. "I know you are," she said. "That's not enough." "No," she said. "It's not." He nodded. A small movement, the nod of a man accepting a sentence rather than a verdict. The distinction mattered, she thought, because a verdict was a judgment of who someone was, and she was not here to judge who he was. She was here to be finished with who they had been together. "I don't hate you," she said. "I want to be clear about that because I think you need to hear it and because it's true. I don't hate you. I don't—" She stopped. The marriage ended before the divorce did. It ended somewhere in that year of choosing her over me, one small choice at a time. And I grieved that. I grieved it in real time while it was happening, which is a particular kind of grief that's exhausting because there's nothing to bury. She looked at her hands in her lap. "What I feel now is, I'm not angry. I'm sad that we got to this instead of something else. And she looked up at him. I'm going to be all right. I want you to know that. I'm going to be more than all right. I know, he said. I've been watching you be more than all right from 1,000 miles away, and he stopped. I'm glad. That's not another stop. I'm glad you're there. I'm glad I'm glad there's someone. She looked at him. The openness in his face had not closed, and she understood that this specific quality of Damian Blackwood looking at her without his usual architecture of control was probably the most honest thing that had ever happened between them. And it was happening now, at the end, when there was nothing left for either of them to protect. Is there anything you need from me? She asked. Practically. The business documentation, the shared accounts that are still in process. Robert is handling all of it, he said. I've told my lawyers to cooperate with everything. He paused. The firm. Your firm. I want you to know, the seed money, the original investment, that's yours. I've had the documentation restructured. There are no Blackwood interests in Ashcroft Design. There never should have been. She had not expected this. She sat with it for a moment. Thank you, she said. It was always yours, he said. The work was yours. He almost smiled. It was a small thing, and it had the quality of something that cost him, and she did not look away from it. I was proud of it. That was always real. Whatever else, I was proud of what you built. She stood up. She had not planned the exact moment she would stand, but she felt it. The completion of something, the point at which staying would be adding to rather than finishing. She picked up her coat from where she'd laid it over the arm of the chair. She looked at him one more time. I was looking at her, and the room was quiet. And outside the narrow window, the November sky was the specific gray of a city that has been alive for a long time and has seen many versions of this. A person leaving a room, a door closing, the ordinary, irreversible passage of things that cannot be undone. Goodbye, Damien, she said. Goodbye, Evelyn, he said. She walked out. In the hallway, Sandra was still there, and Evelyn stopped and said quietly, He's at peace with it, as much as he can be. Sandra pressed her lips together and nodded, and her eyes did something, and Evelyn let her have the moment, because it was hers to have. Then she walked to the elevator and pressed the button, and the doors opened, and she stepped in, and they closed, and she stood in the elevator alone and breathed. Her chest was tight. She let it be tight. She did not try to name what was in it or to sort it into categories: grief, relief, sorrow, the specific exhaustion of a person who has been carrying something for a long time and has finally, in this elevator, on this Thursday afternoon in November, set it completely down. The lobby, the glass doors, the street. New York was doing what New York did, continuous and indifferent and alive in the specific way of cities that have absorbed every version of human experience and continued. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed the cold air, and then she started walking, because she had always thought best on her feet, and there was one more thing she needed to do before she flew back. She walked to a coffee shop on the next block, not the one she'd been in the afternoon she'd called Vincent, a different one, because she was done with the geography of the last several months and needed new spaces. And she sat at a table by the window and called Dana. Dana answered on the second ring. "You're in New York," she said. Not a question. Dana had always had the particular skill of knowing where Evelyn was, roughly, in the way that people who have been close friends for 16 years develop a peripheral awareness of each other. "I saw him," Evelyn said. A pause. "How was it?" "Real," she said. "It was real." She thought about it. "He said goodbye. We both said goodbye. That's—" She stopped. "That's what it was." "Good," Dana said, quietly, with the tone of someone who has been holding space for this specific conversation for a long time, and is glad it happened, and is glad it's done. "I'm coming back to San Francisco tomorrow," Evelyn said. "I know," Dana said. "Design reviews on Friday." Evelyn smiled. It arrived without announcement, a real one, the kind that comes from something unexpected landing the right way. "How do you know about the design review?" "Marcus told me. He's very proud of you for what it's worth. He didn't say it in those words, but that's what he meant." She sat with her coffee and talked to Dana for 20 minutes, about nothing specific and everything general. The way long friendships sometimes communicate most accurately by talking around the thing rather than directly at it. When she hung up, she felt for the first time since she'd landed the specific solidity of a person who has done what she came to do and is ready to leave. She flew back on a Friday morning early and went directly to Alexander's office from the airport with her design folder and her site photographs and the coastal elevation revisions she had been reworking for 2 weeks. She was 8 minutes late for the review, which she would have been mortified by a year ago, and which she now accepted as the consequence of having been on the other side of the country yesterday for reasons that mattered. Alexander was in the conference room when she arrived. He looked up when she came in, and the look was the one she had been cataloging for weeks, and had now, she thought, finally accurately identified. It was the look of someone who has decided that another person is the most interesting thing in the room and has stopped trying to be subtle about it. "You went," he said. "I went." She set down her folder and took off her coat. "It's done." He held her gaze for a moment. "Good," he said, simply. The same word Dana had used, with the same quality. The acknowledgement of someone who has understood the full weight of a thing and is not going to make you carry it any longer than necessary. They spent 3 hours on the design review. She presented the coastal elevation revisions, and he engaged with them with the same kind of full attention he always brought, asking the right questions, pushing back on 2 details that she agreed needed more work, affirming 2 others that she'd been uncertain about and found herself more certain of once he reflected them back to her. The work was good. She knew it was good. She had the particular satisfaction of a person who has made something that is genuinely what it needs to be, and she let herself feel that without diminishing it. At the end of the review, when the other people in the room had collected their things and left, she stayed seated. Alexander stayed seated. The conference room settled into the specific quiet of a room that has held a productive conversation and is now holding a different kind of moment. "You said Thursday," he said. "I did." "And then you went to New York." "I did that too." He leaned back in his chair. I was looking at her with the expression she now understood meant he was deciding how direct to be, which was a thing she had learned about him. That he was always direct, but that he chose his moment. "I need to tell you something," he said. "All right." "The day on the cliff, when she had the knife. I moved before I thought about it." He paused. "That's not... I don't say that to... I'm not narrating what a good person I am. I'm telling you because I need you to understand that it wasn't a calculation." He looked at her directly. "I wasn't thinking about the project or the liability or any of the things I should probably have been thinking about. I moved because it was you." The conference room was very quiet. "I know," she said. "I've been watching you build something here," he said, "for 11 weeks, and I've been trying to be appropriate about it. Give you space. Not make anything of it while you were..." "I know," she said again. He looked at her. "I don't want to get this wrong." "Then don't," she said. "Pay attention and don't get it wrong." She held his gaze. "That's all I need. Attention and honesty. I've spent enough of my life around people who were performing both of those things." He was quiet for a moment. Something in his face settled, not with relief exactly, but with the particular quality of a person who has been carrying a careful restraint for a long time and has just been given permission to set it down. "Dinner," he said. "Tonight," she said. "Tonight," he agreed. She walked home through the city because she had begun walking when she could, and the distance between his office and her studio was manageable if you were willing to walk through the hill sections, which she was. San Francisco did what San Francisco does in November. The fog had come in from the bay, and the air had the specific cool quality of a city that lives close to water, and the light was the diffuse, directionless light of a clouded afternoon that still had brightness in it. Somehow, the way the city managed to hold light, even when it was filtered. She went to her studio. The north-facing windows held the afternoon in the particular way she had known they would when she stood in the space for the first time. A quality of light that was even and honest, the best kind for looking at things accurately. She sat at her drafting table and looked at the revised elevation drawings, and made 3 small corrections and a note to herself about the terrace sightlines, and then she sat back and looked at the room. It was hers. Entirely, simply, completely hers. Her work on the walls, her tools on the desk, her name on the door, Ashcroft Design, West, in the lettering she'd chosen herself, clean and plain and nothing else. She thought about Damien in the hospital room and the look on his face when she'd said goodbye, and the elevator and the lobby and the street, She thought about the specific completeness of something genuinely finished, not abandoned, not escaped, but finished, done in the way that allows what comes after to be entirely new. She thought about Chloe Harrington in federal custody, and about Marcus Harrington in a questioning room in New York, and about a 9-year grievance that had consumed the person carrying it, and she felt the sorrow of that again. Not for what had been done to her, but for the specific waste of it, the years of intelligence and patience and precision aimed at destruction rather than anything else. The grief of competence pointed in the wrong direction. She thought about a parfait plate set down with both hands and a smile so clean it could have passed for genuine, and about a bathroom floor, and about a text at 6:59 in the morning, and about Dana's spare room and Robert's conference table in the cold October street, and the cab that had appeared almost immediately, the way cabs do in the city sometimes, as if they know. She thought about a cliff in California, and a beam coming down, and the ground coming up hard, and Alexander Sterling's weight against her, and the gravel in her palm. She thought about tonight. She turned back to the drawings and worked for another hour. And when the light shifted from afternoon to evening, she cleaned her desk and put on her coat and locked the studio door and walked out into the city. San Francisco in the early evening had the quality of a place that is always becoming something. The fog moving through the hills, the lights coming on in the buildings. The bay catching the last light in the way water does, holding it briefly and then letting it go. She walked toward the waterfront, because she often did in the evenings now, and she stood for a moment at the edge of the Embarcadero and looked at the water and the bridges and the sky, which had cleared in the east and was the specific deep blue of a November sky just after the light is gone but before the dark has fully arrived. She breathed. The air was cold, and it smelled like salt and distance, the particular smell of an ocean that has come a very long way. She thought about the woman who had filed for divorce from an emergency room at 4 in the morning, sitting on a hospital bed with an IV in her arm and an oxygen monitor on her finger, and the complete clarity of someone who has just understood what they need to do. She thought about how afraid that woman had been, beneath the clarity. Afraid in the way that people are afraid of the right things, afraid not of what she was losing, but of whether she was strong enough to build what came next. She was strong enough. She had learned this not once, but repeatedly, in the specific way that lessons worth knowing require. Through the bathroom floor and the staircase and the conference tables and the cliff edge and the elevator and the goodbye. Learned it not as a fact about herself, but as a demonstrated truth, the kind that comes from doing things you weren't certain you could do until you did them. She was not finished. That was the other thing she knew, standing on the Embarcadero in the blue November evening. She was not finished in the sense of completed, because the project was ongoing and the studio was 3 months old, and there were client relationships being built, and sightlines being revised, and a design review on the schedule for next week, and a dinner tonight, and a morning run tomorrow, and all the ordinary accumulation of a life being deliberately constructed, day by day, decision by decision, from the materials of what she actually was. She was, for the first time in a long time, entirely herself. The water moved against the pilings below her. Across the bay, the lights of the bridge were coming on, one by one, in the gathering dark. She stood and watched them for a moment, the bridge becoming itself as the light went, the city filling in around her, the fog moving in its slow, patient way over the hills. Then she turned and walked back into the city. She had somewhere to be.